Hey fam, this is Omni Wizard. Today's story is gonna blow your mind. What if Harry Potter was chosen by the Speed Force and outran death itself at Hogwarts? Show some love with a like and subscribe. Here we go. Chapter 1. The boy on the lightning rode. The cupboard under the stairs smelled like old wood and dust, and the particular kind of loneliness that settles into a place when it's been used as a punishment for long enough. Harry Potter had lived in it for 10 years, and he knew every crack in the ceiling, every splinter in the shelf above his head, every way the light leaked through the slats in the door when Aunt Petunia turned on the hallway lamp. He also knew with the certainty of someone who had never been told but simply knew that something was wrong with him. Not wrong the way the Dursleys meant it, not broken or freakish or ungrateful. Wrong in the way that a river is wrong when it's been dammed up too long. Something behind his ribs hummed constantly, like a second heartbeat that wasn't quite in rhythm with the first. When he was angry, really angry, the humming became a vibration that traveled up through his teeth. When he was scared, time did strange things. Once when Dudley's gang had cornered him behind the school bins, Harry had blinked, just blinked, and found himself on the roof of the gymnasium with no memory of climbing. The teachers had been baffled. Dudley had been furious. Uncle Vernon had locked him in the cupboard for a week. Harry had lain in the dark, listening to the hum and thought, one day I'm going to figure out what you are. That day came in the form of a letter. He felt it before he saw it. A pulse through the floor when the post arrived. Something in the stack of envelopes vibrating at a frequency that matched the thing behind his ribs. When he pulled it free from between the gas bill and a catalog for garden furniture, the hum became a chord, brief and resonant, like a tuning fork struck against stone. The envelope was thick and cream-colored and addressed in green ink, and it knew his name and his cupboard and everything about him that the Dursleys had spent 10 years trying to erase. He didn't get to read it. Vernon's hand came down on his shoulder like a falling beam, and the letter disappeared into his uncle's jacket pocket. Harry stood in the hallway, watching his uncle's face go through 3 different colors, and felt the vibration climb from his sternum to his jaw and back down again. He was used to being overlooked. He was used to being dismissed. But something about this, the letter that had found him, specifically him that knew where he lived and what he was, made the hum pulse sharper than it ever had before, and for just a moment the air in the hallway rippled. Vernon didn't notice. He was already walking away, barking about freaks and nonsense and people who should know better than to go sending letters to children. Harry watched him go and breathed out slowly, and the air stopped rippling, but the letters kept coming, dozens of them, then hundreds, spilling through the letterbox, shooting out of the fireplace, drifting under the gap in the front door. Vernon escalated, boarding windows, driving the family to a leaking shack on a rock in the middle of the sea, and Harry sat on the floor in the dark and watched his uncle's fear with a kind of calm detachment that probably should have worried him more than it did. The hum was loudest here, out over the water, away from the city and the noise and the careful smallness the Dursleys had always tried to press him into. It sang in the bones of his feet like he was standing on something that was moving. Then the door came in. The man who filled the doorframe was enormous, wide as a cart horse, taller than Harry had thought a person could legitimately be, and he handed over a crumpled birthday cake and called Harry by his name like it was the most natural thing in the world. Rubeus Hagrid, keeper of keys and grounds at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Harry ate the cake and listened to everything, and the whole time the hum was a quiet, steady current beneath the shock and the wonder and the grief that arrived. When Hagrid said your parents didn't die in a car crash, Harry, they were murdered, and grief is its own kind of lightning. It strikes fast and leaves you different at the edges. I'm a wizard, Harry said, not really a question. The best there is, Hagrid said warmly. Well, your mum and dad were anyway, and I expect you will be too once you're trained up proper. Harry thought about the roof of the gymnasium. He thought about the ripple in the hallway air. He thought about the hum that hadn't stopped once in his entire life, not even in sleep. Yeah, he said quietly, I expect I will be. Diagon Alley hit him like a wave. Not the magic. He'd expected the magic, or at least expected to be surprised by it. What he hadn't expected was the feeling of recognition. Walking through the leaky cauldron and out into that sunlit alley, watching the world reveal itself in bright shopfronts and impossible architecture, and people who walked around with wands in their belts like it was perfectly ordinary, Harry felt the hum in his chest shift from its usual low frequency into something brighter, something eager, like a dog that's been inside all winter and has just heard the front door open. He got his money. There was more of it than he'd known what to do with, gold coins cool in his palm. And he made a note to feel that fully later when he wasn't in the middle of being amazed by everything else. He got his robes and his books and his potion ingredients and a cage and an owl. A snow-white bird who looked at him with bright orange eyes and tilted her head like she already knew exactly who he was. He named her Hedwig on the spot. The wand took longer. Ollivander's shop was dim and quiet, stacked floor to ceiling with long, thin boxes, and the wandmaker himself materialized from the shadows with the particular unsettling energy of someone who pays very close attention to things. He measured Harry without a tape measure, or rather the tape measure moved on its own, which Harry noted with the clinical interest of someone who has been cataloging impossible things for years, and began pulling boxes. Wand after wand sparked and fizzled. Harry waved them and felt nothing or wrong things, or the hum pushed back against them like a wrong key in the right lock. Then Ollivander brought down a box that was slightly dusty, slightly apart from the others. Holly and Phoenix feather 11 inches supple. He handed it over with an expression Harry couldn't read. Harry wrapped his fingers around it and the hum stopped, not in the way that silence is emptiness. In the way that silence is a held breath. For one perfect moment, everything in Harry's chest was still and clear and absolutely certain, and then the wand blazed with warmth and golden sparks poured from the tip and the hum returned, not louder but different, harmonized somehow like a second voice had joined a song and the song had become what it was always supposed to be. Curious, Ollivander murmured, very curious. Sorry, Harry said, what's curious? The old man's pale eyes traveled from the wand to Harry's face. The phoenix whose tail feather sits in your wand gave another feather, just one other. The wand that feather became, it did great things. Terrible things depending on your point of view. He paused. I wonder what you will do, Mr. Potter. Harry looked down at the wand in his hand, still warm. Probably something nobody's seen before, he said, not bragging, just honest. Ollivander watched him walk out of the shop with an expression that sat somewhere between fascination and concern and stayed there. The Hogwarts Express left from platform 9 3/4, which was accessed by walking through a solid wall, which Harry did without hesitating, because at this point a solid wall was the least strange thing that had happened to him in a week. He found an empty compartment and loaded Hedwig's cage onto the rack and sat down and watched London slide away outside the window, green fields replacing grey streets, and let himself feel the whole thing for a moment, the bigness of it, the relief of it, the sense that his real life was finally actually beginning. The compartment door slid open. The boy who looked in was red-haired and freckled and had a smear of something on his nose that might have been jam. He asked if everything else was full and Harry said yes. A small, instinctive lie that he immediately undid. No, sorry, sit down, I don't mind. Ron Weasley dropped into the seat across from him like he'd been designed specifically to take up space in the most comfortable way possible. They talked easily. Harry had been starved for easy conversation, and Ron seemed genuinely pleased to have someone to talk to who wasn't a sibling. Ron showed him a spell, a bad one, that was supposed to turn his rat scabbers yellow and did absolutely nothing. Harry watched the rat hunker on Ron's lap with small dark eyes that moved around the compartment in a way that made Harry's hum prick up briefly, unexplainably, before settling again. Then a girl appeared in the doorway, bushy hair, bright eyes, a voice that moved at the same speed as her brain, which was faster than most people's. Hermione Granger introduced herself with the particular confidence of someone who considers information to be the primary currency of human interaction, informed them she had already memorized all the course textbooks and found several of them quite inaccurate, and asked if they'd seen a toad. Ron looked at Harry. Harry looked at Ron. We haven't, Harry said, but we'll keep an eye out. She looked at him for a moment with those sharp brown eyes, and Harry got the distinct impression she was filing something away. Then she was gone, off down the corridor on her toad mission. Mental, Ron said cheerfully. Probably, Harry agreed. I liked her. Hogwarts arrived through mist and torchlight and black water, boats cutting across the lake in the dark with first years clutching their robes and staring up at the castle looming overhead, lit from within like a lantern the size of a mountain. Harry sat in his boat and looked up at it and felt the hum surge in his chest like a tide coming in, and for the first time in his life the feeling wasn't strange or frightening or something to suppress. It felt like welcome. The sorting hat went on his head and spoke directly into his mind, an experience Harry found oddly comfortable, having spent 10 years largely inside his own head, and immediately went very still in the particular way of a consciousness that has encountered something unexpected. Well, it said, you are full of surprises, aren't you, am I? Harry thought back. There is bravery in you, Gryffindor bravery, the kind that moves without thinking, but there's something else. A long pause, longer than Harry had heard it pause for anyone else. Something that does not fit into my 4 houses, Mr. Potter, something that predates all 4 founders. Another pause, the speed is in your blood and bones. I can feel it, you belong anywhere you choose, but you will thrive where courage lives. Gryffindor, the hat announced, slightly faster than Harry expected, like it had made a decision it was confident in. The Gryffindor table erupted. Harry walked over through the noise and sat down and found Ron grinning at him from 2 seats away, already accepted, already home. Across the hall at the Slytherin table, a pale blonde boy watched him with an expression that hadn't decided yet what it wanted to be. The first week of Hogwarts was an education in how much Harry had been missing. Not just the magic, though that was extraordinary, the way spells worked like conversations between intent and energy, the way potions had their own logic that was satisfying once you understood it, the way transfiguration revealed that the relationship between objects and their true nature was fundamentally negotiable. It was everything. The feeling of waking up in a dormitory with 4 other boys who considered him a friend. The way the Great Hall smelled in the morning. The sensation of Hedwig landing on his arm in the owlery, and the owlish, dignified affection she carried like a very small, queenly person. He was good at magic. Not academically good the way Hermione was, she knew the theory before she walked into the room. But when Harry pointed a wand at something and meant it, really meant it, the result was clean and immediate and slightly more powerful than it was supposed to be. Professor McGonagall, after Harry's first transfiguration lesson, had kept him back and asked in a carefully neutral tone how long he'd been practicing. "I haven't," Harry said. "You turned your matchstick into a needle on the first attempt," she said, "a perfect needle with the eye and everything. Was that unusual?" She had looked at him the way Ollivander had. "Somewhat," she said carefully and let him go. But the hum during that lesson had been extraordinary. It had spiked every time he successfully performed a spell, like it was delighted, like it was feeding, and Harry was starting to understand that whatever lived behind his ribs wasn't separate from his magic. It was something beneath his magic, something the magic grew from the way a river grows from rain. He didn't tell anyone, not yet. It wasn't that he was hiding it, it was more that he didn't have the language for it yet, and he wanted to understand it before he tried to explain it. Hermione was already suspicious. "You moved differently today," she told him on Friday morning, climbing the stairs toward the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom. In the corridor when Peeves dropped that filing cabinet from the balcony. Peeves dropped a, Ron twisted to look back down the stairs. "When I didn't see, nobody did," Hermione said, still looking at Harry. It fell and Harry stepped out of the way and nobody else had time to react. The cabinet weighs 40 pounds. It fell from 15 feet up. "And you stepped aside like you knew it was coming." Harry had known. The hum had spiked half a second before it fell, and his body had simply moved before he'd consciously decided to. "Lucky reflexes," he said. Hermione's eyes said she did not believe that for a moment. But she let it go for now because they'd arrived at the classroom and something about the room made the back of Harry's neck prickle. Professor Quirrell was already at the front of the room in his purple turban, stuttering pleasantries, arranging papers with slightly trembling hands. He was small and nervous-looking and smelled strongly of garlic, and Harry had met him in the leaky cauldron during his first trip to Diagon Alley and found him forgettable. He still found him forgettable. But the room had something in it, a weight, a darkness that pressed at the edge of Harry's perception the way a sound just below hearing still makes you uneasy. He sat down and took out his parchment and watched Quirrell stutter through an introduction to the course, and the hum ran steady and low and watchful. October arrived in gold and red and brought with it, on a sharp Tuesday morning, the news that Gryffindor had a Quidditch match and Harry Potter would be playing in it, because Professor McGonagall had watched him pull a diving, spiraling broomstick save during flying lessons, catching Neville Longbottom's Remembrall out of the air about 12 feet from the ground, and immediately marched him off to meet the team captain. Oliver Wood had very nearly wept with joy. Harry flew beautifully. He'd known he would. Sitting on a broom felt like an extension of the same thing that happened when he was running, something that moved with him rather than under him, responsive to intention rather than instruction. In his first practice session, he ran the entire pitch at speeds that made the other Gryffindors shade their eyes against the early October sun and watch with their mouths open. "How are you so fast?" George Weasley asked, genuinely curious rather than jealous. "Dunno," Harry said honestly. "It's not the broom," Fred observed. "I tried your broom, I didn't go half that quick." "Maybe it's me," Harry said and grinned and kicked off again before they could follow that thought anywhere complicated. But broom fast and foot fast were different. On a broom, the speed was exhilarating, external, something he could share. When the speed force moved through him on the ground, it was something else entirely. It was interior, cellular, like his whole body was made of something that wanted to move. He'd been testing it in private, in the corridor outside Gryffindor Tower late at night when everyone was asleep, running the length of the 7th floor and back while the portraits snored and the torches guttered in his wake. He was fast. He was very, very fast. On foot, not running but running, the way the Force wanted him to run. The castle blurred. The stones became a smear. His trainers left scorch marks on the floor that he carefully scuffed out with his sock. He'd covered the entire 7th floor in just under a second. He didn't know what that meant exactly, but he knew it was significant. He knew it was the kind of significant that people would have opinions about, and he wasn't ready for opinions yet. He was still in the discovery phase. Still learning the shape of himself. That changed on the night of October 31st. Halloween arrived with a feast that smelled extraordinary and a troll that did not. Harry and Ron had gone looking for Hermione after Quirrell burst in to announce that there was a mountain troll in the dungeon. Because Hermione was in the girls' bathroom and didn't know, and they'd found the troll there before they found Hermione, 12 feet of gray muscle and minimal intelligence trying to locate the source of the sobbing coming from the stalls. Ron threw something and hit the troll on the head, and Harry did something that surprised even himself. He didn't think about it. The hum spiked to a full roar, the way it did when he was genuinely scared and his body moved, not running exactly not yet, but something in that direction, a series of adjustments too fast for the eye to follow, and he ended up on the troll's back with his wand in its nose almost before he'd made the decision to get there. The troll went down. Hermione performed the Alohomora and the girls' bathroom door blew off its hinges. Then the teachers arrived. McGonagall's eyes swept the bathroom. The unconscious troll, the shattered door. The three 11-year-olds standing in the middle of it all, Hermione in particular with her hair more chaotic than usual and an expression of someone who is already composing the cover story. Explanation, McGonagall said crisply. Hermione gave one that was mostly true. Ron added details. Harry stood quietly and let them, and noticed that McGonagall kept glancing at him, specifically at the scorch marks on the bathroom floor, 2 perfect foot-sized burns in the tile, in a position that didn't quite make sense if you thought too hard about where the troll had been standing. She didn't say anything. She gave Ron and Harry 5 points each for sheer nerve and Hermione 5 for cool logic, and warned them sternly about dangerous situations, and they all went back to the feast with the warm, slightly giddy feeling of people who have survived something. Walking up the corridor, Hermione grabbed Harry's elbow and pulled him just slightly behind Ron. "How did you get on its back?" she said quietly, her eyes fast and sharp on his face. "Jumped," Harry said. "From the floor, directly to its shoulders. Without a run-up. I'm athletic." "Harry," she stopped walking entirely. "I am not an idiot and I don't appreciate being treated like one." He looked at her. The Great Hall was ahead of them, warm noise spilling under the doors. Ron was already pushing through with the enthusiasm of someone whose stomach was making executive decisions. Harry thought about the roof of the gymnasium, the letters, the way they'd vibrated, the scorch marks on the 7th floor he'd scuffed out with his sock, the needle he'd made on the first try. "No," he said, "you're really not." So, he said, "I'll tell you, but not here." She nodded once briskly, as though she'd been waiting for him to make exactly this decision, and they followed Ron into the feast. He told them both in the end. 3 nights later, in a quiet corner of the common room after everyone else had gone to bed, with the fire down to coals and Hermione's quill-scratching notes so fast the parchment was nearly crying, he told them about the hum. About the gymnasium roof, about the way time had moved differently during the troll incident, about the scorch marks on the 7th floor, about the broom tests, about the sense that whatever it wasn't exactly magic, or wasn't only magic, that it was something older or deeper or running in a different channel than spells and wands worked in. Ron was quiet through most of it, which was unlike him. When Harry finished, Ron looked at the fire for a long moment. "So you're dead fast," he said. "That's what you took from all of that," Hermione said. "That's mostly what he said though, isn't it?" Ron reasoned. "Fast and sort of time-wise when he's scared." He looked at Harry. "Can you do it now on purpose?" "Yeah," Harry said, and he crossed the common room from one side to the other and back again before Ron had finished blinking. Ron stared at the space where Harry had just been and then at the space where Harry now was and said, after a long silence, "That is genuinely the best thing I've ever seen." Hermione was not looking up from her notes. "I've cross-referenced it with 3 textbooks already and there is no mention of anything like it in modern magical literature, which either means it's ancient or it's completely unprecedented or both." "Both," Harry said, feeling certain about it the way he felt certain about his own name. She looked up at him then. "Aren't you frightened?" He thought about it honestly. "No," he said. "I've been living with it for 10 years. It's the most familiar thing about me." She held his gaze for a moment, and then nodded once and went back to her notes. November came cold and clear and brought with it Harry's first Quidditch match and something else entirely. The match was against Slytherin grey sky above the pitch, packed stands on all sides, and Harry on his Nimbus 2000 carving through the air with the easy fluency of someone born to it. He spotted the snitch in the second 20 minutes, a glint of gold near the Slytherin goalposts, and went for it with everything he had. And the speed was extraordinary even by his own standards, the hum and the broom working in the same direction for once. And he caught the snitch with one hand while nearly horizontal to the ground, and the crowd went absolutely mental. He landed to a wall of noise and Ron pounding him on the back and found himself grinning wide and helpless in a way he hadn't really done before, the specific grin of someone winning something in front of people who are delighted to watch them win it. Draco Malfoy was not among the delighted. Harry could see him across the pitch-pale face tight with something that wasn't quite anger but was related to it. The expression of someone recalculating. But that wasn't the interesting thing about the match. The interesting thing was the moment in the middle of the second quarter when Harry's broom had gone suddenly, violently wrong, bucking and spinning, and fighting him the way a broom simply did not fight a rider, twisting toward the ground with mechanical malice. Harry had locked his knees and his hands and felt the hum scream up through his body, and in the fraction of a second before he was thrown, time had stretched. He'd felt each millisecond individually, had been aware of the crowd and the sky and the broom's mechanical wrongness with absolute crystal clarity, and had adjusted, weight here, arm there, tilt the core back a degree, in time that should not have been available to him. He'd recovered, stayed on. The broom had settled as suddenly as it had started. Later, Hermione told him she'd spotted Professor Snape in the stands, eyes fixed on Harry's broom, lips moving without stopping. She'd broken his concentration by setting his robes on fire. Harry filed Snape into a mental folder labeled "Watch this one" and didn't think too hard about it. He had bigger things on his mind. The staircase incident happened on a Wednesday evening in late November, and it changed everything. Harry was coming back from the library alone, Hermione had stayed to finish a comparative analysis of goblin rebellions, and Ron had abandoned them both in favor of chess in the common room, climbing the moving staircase toward the fourth-floor landing. He was tired and thinking about nothing in particular when the hum spiked. Not a gradual rise. A sudden, violent spike that hit him behind the sternum like a fist. He stopped walking and looked up. Professor Quirrell was on the landing above him, coming from the direction of the third-floor corridor, the one with the door that was forbidden for students to go near on pain of death. He hadn't seen Harry yet. He was moving quickly, head down, robes rustling, and there was something wrong with the way he was moving, too fast for Quirrell, too purposeful, none of the usual nervousness in his shoulders. The turban seemed higher than usual or differently shaped, or the staircase began to move. Harry grabbed the railing on instinct. The whole section was pivoting, swinging away from the fourth-floor landing and aligning itself with the third-floor corridor. Quirrell reached the top of the turning staircase and finally looked down and saw Harry. And for just a moment his face did something that wasn't Quirrell's face. It went very still and the eyes went flat and ancient and aware in a way that made Harry's entire nervous system light up like it had been plugged in. "Potter," Quirrell said, and it was Quirrell's stammer but the voice underneath wasn't. "Shouldn't you be in your common room?" "Probably," Harry said. He was standing 3 steps down from the landing and the staircase had stopped moving and the hum was so loud in his chest he was surprised Quirrell couldn't hear it. "Were you on the 3rd floor?" "I know I wasn't, that is, I was simply right," Harry said, and Quirrell moved. Not quickly, not threateningly, just moved to step past Harry and continue down the stairs. Nothing unusual, a professor passing a student on a staircase. But his robe swung as he turned and the turban shifted, the turban that was always too high and too tight and never quite sat right, and the torchlight hit the back of it at an angle that it hadn't before. And Harry saw it. A face. Not Quirrell's face. Pale and gaunt and high-nosed and somehow still present even through cloth, like a face pressed against a window from outside, sunken cheeks, barely their lips curved up at the corners, and eyes that were red. Red. Harry had moved before the thought completed. Not ran, the staircase was too narrow for a full run, but shifted, 2 steps up in less than a blink, fast enough that he was above Quirrell before Quirrell had finished the movement that would have put him below. He was looking at the turban full on, and he could see the outline of it clearly now, and he thought, with a cold clarity that surprised him with its own calmness, "There's someone on the back of his head." Quirrell's body went very still. "Mr. Potter," said a voice that was not Quirrell's, thin as paper and twice as sharp. It came from behind the turban. It came from the back of Quirrell's head. My, what sharp eyes you have." "Who are you?" Harry said, though he thought he already knew. "Someone who has been watching you," the voice said. "Someone who is very interested in what you are." A pause. "You move rather unusually for an 11-year-old boy." The hum in Harry's chest was a roar. The torchlight in the corridor was behaving strangely, flickering, casting shadows that stretched wrong, bending slightly around Harry the way light bends around heat. "I know about the stone," Harry said. He didn't, not really. He knew there was something on the 3rd floor, something Hagrid had mentioned obliquely once. But saying it felt right, felt like the correct move, the move that stole momentum from whoever was behind that turban. The silence that followed was longer than the one before it. "You are," the voice said, slow and almost thoughtful, "not what I expected." "No," Harry agreed. "People keep saying that." Quirrell's body turned on the stairs, not quickly, not aggressively. He was looking at Harry over his own shoulder now, which was anatomically uncomfortable and somehow made the whole scene worse. The torch on the wall nearest Harry sputtered and went out. "We will speak again," the voice said. "Probably," Harry said. Quirrell descended the stairs and was gone around the corner, robes sweeping the stone, footsteps even and unhurried as though nothing had happened. Harry stood on the staircase in the dark where the torch had been and listened to the silence and breathed. The hum settled slowly the way a disturbed pool of water settles, gradual, concentric, working its way from the outside in until the surface is still and reflects everything clearly. He thought, red eyes, he thought, someone's on the back of his head. He thought Voldemort, and then he thought with the same cold clarity that had carried him through the whole thing, right, so that's what we're dealing with. He walked the rest of the way to the common room and found Ron at the chess board and Hermione with her face in a book, and he sat down and said quietly, I need to tell you both something. Ron moved a knight. How bad? Fairly bad. Hermione looked up. Her eyes read his face the way she read everything, quickly and completely. Tell us, she said, so he did. And in the firelight of the Gryffindor common room, with the castle settling into night around them and the hum quiet and watchful in his chest, Harry Potter laid out what he knew and what he suspected, and what he intended to do about it, which was not hide and not wait, and not hope that someone older and wiser would handle it. Something had chosen him. Something ancient and fast and fundamental had reached through the crack in the universe left by a dying curse and put itself in him, and he was not going to spend his life crouching under that gift like it was something to be ashamed of. He was 11 years old and he had looked Voldemort in the face on a staircase and said people keep saying that without his voice shaking once. The lightning road stretched ahead of him, long and bright and fast as thought. He couldn't wait to run it. Chapter 2, Something the Brooms Can't Catch. Winter came to Hogwarts the way it always did, without asking permission. One morning the lake was still and gray as iron, and by afternoon the grounds were white and the owlery was full of birds reluctant to fly, and the castle corridors smelled permanently of wet wool and fireplace smoke. The gargoyles on the third-floor balcony wore caps of snow that hadn't been there the night before, and the moving staircases were more temperamental than usual, swinging away from landings with what felt like deliberate perversity. Harry barely noticed the cold. He had more important things on his mind. 3 days after the staircase incident, he'd gone back to the third-floor corridor at midnight alone, because Ron had fallen asleep in the common room and Harry hadn't woken him, and Hermione had said she was coming and then shown up in her dressing gown with her hair loose and a notebook already in hand. He'd looked at her and she'd looked at him, and they'd both decided without saying anything that this was the kind of thing two people could do just as well as three. The door to the corridor was locked. Harry held his wand out and the lock turned before he said anything, before he even thought the incantation. The magic simply arrived, fast and certain. Hermione noted this in her notebook without comment. Beyond the door was a corridor that smelled of dogs, specifically of a very large dog or possibly several dogs, and at the far end was a trapdoor, and guarding the trapdoor was the largest living thing Harry had ever stood in front of. 3 heads, each one the size of a small car, each breathing slowly in the way of something that is asleep but might not remain so. It filled the room the way water fills a cup, completely, without consideration for anything else. That's a Cerberus, Hermione whispered. I know what it is, Harry said, looking at the trapdoor under its right forepaw. What's under the trapdoor? The Philosopher's Stone, Hermione said, as though this were obvious, which it was for her. Nicholas Flamel, the alchemist. It has to be, it makes sense. Flamel and Dumbledore worked together. It would explain the heightened security and Gringotts was broken into in July, the day Hagrid took me there, Harry said. Yes, Hermione said. Someone tried to steal it and failed, so it was moved here. And whatever's under that trapdoor isn't just the dog. She looked at him. We should go. We should go, Harry agreed, and they went, and neither of them said out loud the thing they both understood, that Quirrell, or whatever was living in Quirrell, had been in this corridor the night Harry found him on the stairs, and that a thing sharing a head with Voldemort had a very particular reason to want what was under that trapdoor. They told Ron in the morning. Ron's response was to eat a large amount of toast and then say, right, so what are we doing about it? This was one of the many reasons Harry liked Ron Weasley. The answer for the moment was watching, learning. Paying attention to Quirrell with the careful peripheral attention of someone who doesn't want the subject to know they're being watched. Harry was good at this. 10 years in a house where being noticed usually meant being punished had made him expert at the kind of presence that doesn't register. He could stand in the corner of a room and practically become furniture. Quirrell taught his classes with the same trembling nervousness as always, fumbling with his notes and starting at sudden noises. But Harry had looked into those eyes on the staircase, and he knew what to look for now. The moments when something else looked out of them. Brief, controlled, like a hand pulling a curtain aside and then letting it fall. It happened most often when Quirrell thought no one was paying attention. In those moments the stutter smoothed out, the shoulders straightened, and whatever was wearing Quirrell wore him with the ease of someone familiar with the garment. Harry noticed every time. He also noticed the shade for the first time in December, though he didn't know yet what it was. He'd been coming back from late Quidditch practice. Oliver Wood had a relationship with practice schedules that bordered on the religious. cutting through the grounds near the edge of the forbidden forest because it was the fastest route to the castle entrance from the pitch. The sun had already gone, leaving that particular winter half-dark where the snow on the ground does the sky's job and the trees at the forest edge were black shapes against pale ground. Something moved between two of the trees. Harry stopped. It wasn't an animal. Or rather, it moved like an animal that had forgotten what movement was supposed to look like, wrong rhythm, wrong weight, like a shadow that had been told to mimic walking and was almost getting it right. It was darker than the trees, darker than the dark between them, and it had no edges that he could pin down. It was there and then it wasn't and then it was again, drifting between trunks in a way that felt like hunger. The hum went completely silent, not the normal silence of the hum settling. A different silence, the silence of something that recognized a predator. Harry stood very still and watched the thing drift between the trees, and the cold on the back of his neck had nothing to do with the temperature. His wand was in his hand before he decided to reach for it, not because he thought a spell would help, but because standing in the dark with no wand felt like standing in the dark with no heartbeat. The thing paused between two oaks at the forest's edge. It had no face, nothing that could be called a face, but Harry had the absolute and unmistakable sensation of being looked at, assessed. The way you know someone is staring at the back of your head even when you can't see them. Then it was gone. Between one blink and the next, it simply wasn't there anymore. The hum came back slowly, reluctantly, like it was checking first to make sure the coast was clear. Harry stood in the snow for another 30 seconds, then walked the rest of the way to the castle without running, because running felt like the wrong signal to send. He described it to Hermione the next morning and watched her work through 3 separate theories in real time, her quill moving across parchment in quick, decisive strokes. It could be a boggart, she said, but boggarts don't appear outdoors. Generally, they prefer enclosed spaces. A Dementor is possible, but we'd have felt it. The cold would have been not that cold, a different kind. An Inferius is possible, but they need. It felt like something that knew me, Harry said. Hermione stopped writing. It stopped, Harry said, and looked at me, specifically at me. She looked up from her parchment. Ron beside her had gone quiet with his porridge spoon halfway to his mouth. Like it recognized you, Ron said. Like it was interested in me, Harry said. There's a difference. Hermione wrote something new at the top of her page, underlined it twice, and said nothing more about it, which Harry had learned meant she was thinking at a depth that required silence to operate in. Christmas arrived and most of Hogwarts departed with it. Harry stayed, Ron stayed too, cheerfully, because the burrow at Christmas was, according to Ron, overwhelming in the best way, and occasionally he needed a break from being overwhelmed. The castle in the holiday week was a different creature entirely. Quiet, enormous, the great hall done in 12 Christmas trees and real snow falling from the enchanted ceiling. Harry spent mornings doing something that would have horrified Oliver Wood if he'd known about it. Running, not on a broom, on foot, on the grounds in the snow, starting at the front steps and going until he wanted to stop and then going further. The castle grounds were large. Hogsmeade was a mile down the road. The perimeter of the lake was nearly 2 miles around. None of it presented a meaningful distance problem. He was learning what his body could do when he let it do it properly. Speed he'd understood for a while. The distance in a blink, the time stretching when something fell or moved toward him, the way his body made adjustments that his conscious mind hadn't approved yet. But there was more to it than velocity. When he pushed past a certain threshold, when the hum moved from chest to extremities and the air pressure changed around him, there was something that happened at the edge of that speed that he didn't have words for yet. Time got thinner, not slower exactly. Thinner, like a stretched piece of fabric that you can almost see through, and in the thin places Harry could see things, not clearly, not usefully yet. More like afterimages, the impression of someone who'd stood where he was standing, recently or not so recently. A flash of color, a sound without a source. Once running the lake's perimeter at what felt like full speed, he'd passed through a warm patch of air that smelled like a kitchen and heard someone laugh, a woman's laugh, quick and delighted, and it was gone before he could grab for it. He wasn't frightened by it, he was fascinated. He was also, by Christmas morning, beginning to understand that he could do more than run. It had started as an experiment. He'd been standing at the edge of the lake, watching his breath fog, and he'd thought, what if I vibrate? Not his whole body, that was the speed, but his hand, just his hand. Vibrating it at the frequency the hum suggested, the way a note suggests a pitch. He'd held his hand out over the water and concentrated, and the hum had risen and his fingers had blurred, and the water directly below his hand had shivered in concentric rings, spreading out without him touching it. He'd held that for 10 seconds and then released it, and stood there looking at the rings moving outward across the lake's gray surface. Interesting, he said out loud to himself, to the winter air. Extremely, said Hermione from directly behind him, and Harry did not jump because the hum had already told him she was there. He did turn around, though. She was standing in her winter cloak with her notebook already open and her quill somehow not freezing, which was, now that he thought about it, probably a warming charm. Her eyes were bright with the particular light they got when she was thinking about something that genuinely thrilled her. "How long have you been there?" he said. "Long enough." She came to stand beside him and looked at the rings still moving across the water. "You vibrated the air column above the surface," she said, "which created a pressure wave, which moved the water without touching it." She made a note. "Harry, do you understand what this means? That I can make lakes wobble. That your speed force, whatever it is, isn't just locomotion, it's a fundamental energy that you can direct." She looked up from the notebook. "It's not a power, it's a physics, and you're only beginning to understand the applications." Harry looked out at the lake. The rings had nearly reached the opposite bank. "My parents," he said. He hadn't planned to say it. It just came out the way things did when you were standing in winter quiet with someone you trusted. Hermione looked at him. "When I push past a certain speed," he said, "I can almost hear things from other times. Once I heard someone laugh in it." He stopped. "I don't know what I'm going to find when I go deep enough." "Does that scare you?" He thought about it honestly. The way she'd asked him in the common room weeks ago whether the speed force frightened him and he'd said number. This was different from that question. This was more specific. "No," he said. "I want to find it, whatever it is." She nodded slowly and didn't try to talk him out of it, which was one of Hermione Granger's most important qualities. She understood the difference between protecting someone and diminishing them. "Then we figure it out," she said, "methodically." "Obviously methodically," Harry agreed, and she smiled and made another note, and the lake stretched out before them, wide and gray and full of depth. January brought Quidditch back, and with it something Harry had not anticipated: Draco Malfoy going out of his way to create problems. The situation on the pitch was Gryffindor practice, clear sky. Harry running a drill Oliver had devised that involved tracking a modified snitch through 3 different elevation changes. He was good at it, good in the way that stopped being impressive because it was simply consistent. Catching the snitch on the 3rd pass, 4th pass, every pass, his eyes and hands and the hum working in concert without apparent effort. The Slytherin team had appeared at the pitch boundary, Malfoy at the front with his arms crossed, watching. "You're using a school broom," Harry called over, because it was true. Oliver had confiscated the Nimbus 2000 for the drill because he wanted Harry developing his tracking instincts rather than relying on the broom's speed. "The school broom is fine for most people." Malfoy's jaw tightened. "Seems to be fine for you," Marcus Flint, the Slytherin captain, said not nicely. "It is," Harry agreed pleasantly. Malfoy stepped forward off the boundary line and onto the pitch, technically Gryffindor's book time, technically not allowed. "Let's see how fine it is when you're not just drilling. Let's see how fast you really are, Potter." Harry handed the snitch back to Oliver and looked at Malfoy for a moment. "In the air or on the ground?" Malfoy blinked. "What? Pick," Harry said. "Brooms or feet? You can't race on foot." "Okay," Harry said, and he ran. He ran the full length of the pitch, a quarter mile end to end, and was back before Malfoy had finished processing the fact that he'd gone. He was just there and then not there and then there again, standing in the same spot, slightly warmer than a moment ago, the scorch marks of his trainers already cooling in the frost on the pitch grass. The Gryffindor team had gone very quiet. The Slytherin team had gone quieter. Malfoy was staring at the spot where Harry had been and then the spot where Harry now was, and his face had done something complicated and involuntary, the same recalculating expression Harry had seen after the Quidditch match, but more so, stripped of its usual arrangement because Malfoy hadn't had time to put it on properly. "How?" Malfoy said, and it wasn't an insult or a challenge, it was a genuine question, asked before he could dress it as something else. "I'll let you know when I figure it out," Harry said. Then he picked the snitch back up from Oliver's hand and got back on the school broom because the drill wasn't finished, and he had no particular interest in milking a moment that had already made its point. He heard Malfoy and the Slytherins leaving the pitch boundary, and once they were gone, Fred Weasley said into the silence, "Harry, mate, I need you to understand that I will be telling that story forever." "Focus on the drill, Fred," Oliver said faintly. Snape cornered him on a Tuesday. Not literally cornered, Snape was too controlled for anything as messy as cornering. But he appeared at the end of a corridor in the potions wing when Harry was heading back from the library alone, and stopped him with the particular authority of a man who knows that authority is mostly about timing. "Potter," he said, "walk with me." Harry walked with him. The potions corridor was empty, stone-cold, smelling of things that had been brewed and things that were still waiting to be. Snape's robes were perfectly still despite the movement, an achievement Harry had always found mildly impressive. His face was in its usual arrangement, sharp and carefully neutral, with an undercurrent of something that was either disdain or something more complicated, wearing disdain's clothes. "I have been watching you," Snape said, not looking at him, looking straight ahead. "I know," Harry said. Snape did look at him then briefly, a quick assessing sideways glance. "During your Quidditch match in November," he continued, "your broom was interfered with." I know, Harry said, it was you. It was not me, Snape said, with a precision that made Harry believe him without entirely wanting to. I was breaking the interference. Someone else had initiated it. And whoever was doing it was in the stands, close enough to maintain eye contact with your broom for the duration of the attempt. Harry thought about the match, the teacher's box, Quirrell in the teacher's box sitting next to Snape. You stopped it, Harry said. I stopped you from falling, Snape said coolly, because the paperwork involved in a student's death is considerable and I find paperwork irritating. Harry looked at him for a moment. Thank you, he said. Snape looked deeply, profoundly uncomfortable with this. Don't thank me, he said. Consider it a professional obligation. He stopped walking. They were at the end of the corridor at the stone arch that led back toward the main castle. You are not as subtle as you believe, Potter. Your activities have not gone unnoticed. Which activities specifically? The ones that leave scorch marks, Snape said flatly. The ones that produced a pressure event measurable by the instruments in my office twice at midnight on 2 separate occasions. The ones that, he stopped. A very deliberate pause. The ones that made Professor Flitwick's silver ink pot resonate for 40 seconds after you passed his classroom door at a speed that, by my estimation, should not be physically achievable. Harry held Snape's gaze. What do you want to know? I want to know, Snape said, what you are, because it is my job to know what is happening in this castle and I find that I cannot categorize you, which is, another pause, this one longer, irritating. I can't categorize me either, Harry said honestly. I'm working on it. Snape looked at him for what felt like a long time, reading something in Harry's face that Harry couldn't feel himself. Then he said very quietly, be careful, Potter. The thing that is interested in the stone is also interested in you. And it is very old, and it does not lose interest easily. Then he turned and walked back down the potions corridor, robes perfectly still, footsteps even on the stone, and left Harry standing at the arch. Harry thought, Snape is more complicated than I thought. He also thought, something else knew what I was before I understood it myself, and that something else is living on the back of Quirrell's head. The hum agreed, running low and watchful in his chest as he walked back toward the main castle. The shade came back in February, and this time it wasn't subtle. Harry was in the Forbidden Forest with Hagrid, officially helping him with a detention he'd been assigned for being out after hours. A technicality, since he'd been out after hours running experiments rather than causing trouble, but Filch's rules didn't distinguish. The forest at night was extraordinary in the way that genuinely dangerous things are extraordinary, too much of everything, sound and dark, and the press of living things too close together. Hagrid moved through it like it was his sitting room, which, in a way, it was. They found the unicorn in the clearing. Silver white and quite dead, lying on its side in a pool of its own light, the way unicorns seem to carry light even in death, and the forest around it was very quiet in the particular way things are quiet when something terrible has very recently occurred. Merlin, Hagrid breathed, his lamp swinging low over the body. Something's been feeding on it. Harry crouched beside the unicorn and put his hand near the wound on its flank, not touching. The hum was doing something strange, not spiking but shivering the way a string shivers when you pluck the string next to it. A sympathetic vibration. He'd never felt it do this before. Hagrid, he said, when did this happen? Recently, Hagrid said, look, the light's still in it, it fades fast. Harry stood up and looked at the trees around the clearing. The shade was there. He knew it before he saw it. The hum went to that particular silence again, the predator silence, and then he saw the movement between the trees, that wrong rhythm drift, that too dark darkness. It was closer than last time, significantly closer. And it was looking at the dead unicorn, and then at Harry, and in the 2-second window before Harry put himself between Hagrid and the tree line, he saw something that hadn't been there in December. The shade had an outline now. Not a clear one, not a face or a form, but the suggestion of a shape like it was filling in, becoming more defined, more present, as though feeding on magical death was accelerating something that had been gradual. Hagrid, Harry said, his voice completely even, go back to your hut. Harry, I'm not leaving you in, I'm not in danger, Harry said, but you will be if you're standing next to me when I deal with this. Go. Hagrid went with a speed that suggested he trusted Harry's certainty more than he trusted himself to argue with it. Harry turned back to the tree line. I've seen you twice now, he said to the shade, to the dark between the trees. You're getting more solid. Whatever you're doing, it's working. The shade drifted forward, crossing into the moonlight of the clearing, and the moonlight didn't help. It passed through the thing rather than illuminating it, which was wrong in a way that made the hum scream suddenly, urgently, almost painfully. Harry raised his wand. He was absolutely certain the wand wouldn't do much, but he raised it. The shade stopped at the edge of the clearing, not because of the wand. For the same reason it had stopped at the forest edge in December, assessing. Calculating, whatever intelligence lived in that moving darkness was careful rather than hungry, and the hunger was secondary to something else. It spoke, not in words, not in sound, It spoke directly into the place where the hum lived, pressed something into Harry's chest like a cold hand on a drum, and what arrived in Harry's mind was not language but meaning, brutal and clear. You smell like someone who has already died. Harry's breath fogged in the night air. He held the shade's not gaze with steady eyes and said aloud into the clearing, I haven't died, something tried and it didn't work. The cold pressure again. An image, this time a scar, lightning-shaped. Seen from outside as though the shade had looked at it. That's right, Harry said. And whatever that scar means to you, here's what it means to me. I'm still here, and you're in my forest. The shade withdrew, not fled. It didn't do anything as hasty as flee. It withdrew deliberate backward into the trees, its wrong rhythm drift carrying it away through the dark until there was nothing between the oaks but night. Harry stood in the clearing for a long moment, wand still raised, listening. The unicorn's silver light was fading slowly. The forest was settling back into its normal sounds, owl, wind, distant water. He lowered his wand. You smell like someone who has already died. He turned that over in his mind on the walk back to the castle, looking at it from different angles, the way you look at something in dim light to figure out what it actually is. The scar wasn't just a mark. He'd known that, everyone knew that, the whole wizarding world had made it the central fact of his existence. But the shade was something that lived at the intersection of death and magic and time, and what it had read in his scar was not survived but something closer to threshold. He'd been on the other side of something, briefly, and come back. He told Hermione and Ron in the morning, and Hermione's quill went still for a full 5 seconds before she started writing, which was the longest he'd ever seen her not write while receiving information. The Speed Force, she said slowly, was created by the collision of two opposing magical forces. The killing curse and your mother's sacrifice, two absolutes meeting in the same point. The energy that produced couldn't just dissipate, it had to go somewhere. It went into me, Harry said. It went into you, she agreed. But equal and opposite, if a positive version of that energy went into you, then a negative version went somewhere else, Harry said. They looked at each other. The shade, Ron said from behind his porridge with the voice of someone who finds himself in extraordinary situations constantly and is choosing to remain calm about it. The shade, Harry and Hermione said together. March, and the thing living in Quirrell was becoming bolder. Harry could feel it. Not through any dramatic increase in activity, it was subtler than that. Quirrell lingered near the third-floor corridor more often. He moved through the castle at odd hours. His lessons became slightly more distracted, as though the intelligence behind his eyes was spending more of its focus elsewhere. Hermione had found Nicola's Flamel by then, in a library book she'd already read. An oversight she found privately mortifying, and the picture was complete. The stone made the elixir of life. The elixir of life sustained a body indefinitely, and a thing without a body had very good reasons to want it. The trapdoor under the Cerberus was not just one protection but several. Hermione was sure of it, the kind of layered magical security that took serious thought to assemble. He'll move soon, Harry said one evening in early March, sitting by the common room fire. Quirrell, whatever's running him, it'll be before the end of term. How do you know? Ron said. Because it's getting impatient, Harry said simply. I can feel it when I'm near him. The thing underneath gets louder. Ron and Hermione exchanged a look over his head, the kind of look that said, we've both noticed that Harry says things like this now and they're always right. What do we do? Ron said. We go through first, Harry said, before he can. That's, Hermione started. Insane, Harry offered. I was going to say premature, she said. We don't know the protections, we don't know what's down there. We know someone's going down there soon, Harry said. Who shouldn't? And we know that if Voldemort gets a body back, he said the name clearly without flinching the way he always did, and the common room fire crackled. This gets worse for everyone. Fast. The fire settled. Ron pulled his knees up to his chest and looked at the ceiling with the expression of someone adding up a set of numbers and not loving the total. Hermione chewed her quill. We need more information, she said finally. Agreed, Harry said. We've got time. He watched the fire, not much but some. Above the common room, the castle was quiet. In the forbidden forest, something moved between the trees, growing more solid by the week, drawn to the stone and drawn to the boy who smelled like a crossed threshold. The Speed Force hummed in Harry's chest, low and steady and patient. He put another log on the fire and picked up his charms textbook and settled into wait. Chapter 3: The Mirror Doesn't Lie Fast Enough. April at Hogwarts smelled like mud and new grass, and the particular anxiety of students who had just realized exams were closer than they'd been pretending. The grounds dried out in patches, the lake went from iron gray to something almost blue on clear days, and the greenhouses steamed with the effort of whatever Professor Sprout was coaxing into bloom in there. It should have been a peaceful month. It wasn't. Harry started having visions in April. The first one happened during a charms lesson. He was practicing the Wingardium Leviosa on a ceramic dish. They'd graduated from feathers, and the hum did something new, something it had never done before. Instead of rising or spiking or going silent, it reached, sideways somehow in a direction that wasn't spatial, like a hand extending into water that looked shallow and discovering depth. The classroom vanished, not in the dramatic everything going black way, more like a film laid over the top of it. He could still see Flitwick at the front of the room, still see Ron beside him mouthing an incantation at his own dish, but beneath that image, bleeding through it like light through old paper, was something else. A kitchen, small and warm, the kind of kitchen that is distinguished not by what it looks like, but by how it feels, accumulated warmth, accumulated use. A woman with red hair and green eyes standing at the counter with her back to him, doing something with her wand that produced small golden sparks. She was humming under her breath, an actual song with melody, and the hum in Harry's chest resonated with it the way two tuning forks resonate when struck in sequence. She turned. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at something to his left, something below him, because she was looking down, and her face when she looked at it was the specific, unguarded expression of someone who is delighted by what they're seeing and isn't bothering to moderate it. She said something. Harry couldn't hear it. Then the kitchen was gone and the charms classroom was back, and his ceramic dish had risen approximately 4 feet off the desk and was rotating slowly with no one maintaining the spell. "Excellent, Mr. Potter," Flitwick squeaked, because of course he assumed Harry had done it on purpose. Harry lowered the dish carefully and sat with his hands flat on the desk and breathed. He knew who she was. He'd seen one photo, Hagrid had given him a photo album at the end of his first week, and her eyes in the photo were the same as his eyes in the mirror. And the photo was frozen, but her face in the vision had moved, and that was the difference between a photograph and a memory. He didn't say anything to Ron, not then. He put his hands in his pockets and listened to the hum settle and decided he needed to test this properly before he tried to explain it. That night he ran, full speed down from the castle, across the grounds, skirting the lake, the world going to blur on either side of him and the cold night air parting around him without resistance. He pushed past the first threshold, the one where time thinned, and kept going, pushed past the second one he'd found in December on the lake perimeter, and found a third one he hadn't known was there, a place where the speed became something more than speed, where the hum expanded outward from his chest to the full circumference of his body and the world didn't just blur, it layered. Past and present, running on top of each other. He was on the grounds and he was somewhere else simultaneously. A long stone corridor, candlelit with portraits he half recognized, and 2 people walking in it. The red-haired woman and a man with dark, untidy hair and glasses that had been repaired at the bridge with spellotape. They were arguing, but fondly the way people argue when they already know how the argument ends. The man gestured with his wand at something ahead of them and she batted his arm down, laughing, and the laugh, the quick, delighted laugh, was the one he'd heard at the lake in December. The woman looked over her shoulder, directly at Harry. She couldn't see him. He was almost sure she couldn't see him. He was in the past, or the Speed Force's echo of the past. And she was in it, and he was passing through. But she looked exactly where he was standing, with an expression that flickered through several things rapidly, confusion, then wonder, then something very close to recognition, before her husband said something and her attention snapped back. Harry came out of the vision at the edge of the lake, skidding to a stop with the frost-stiff grass crunching under his trainers, breathing harder than the run warranted. His mother had almost seen him. He stood at the lake's edge for a long time, looking at the black water, and the hum was very gentle, almost apologetic, like it understood what it had just handed him and was sorry for the weight of it. "It's fine," he told it quietly, which was not entirely true but was moving in that direction. He ran back to the castle and told Hermione everything in the morning, and for the first time in his acquaintance with her, she put down her quill and just listened without writing anything down, and when he finished she was quiet for a long moment. "She looked at you," Hermione said. "Almost," Harry said. "Harry." She said his name with the care of someone picking up something they're not sure is fragile. "The Speed Force, it isn't just speed, is it? It exists outside of normal time. You're not remembering these moments, you're visiting them." "Yes," Harry said, and Hermione stopped. "Your mother understood magic in ways most people didn't. If she has some awareness of," she stopped again. This was unusual for Hermione. "I'm trying to be scientific about something that keeps making me feel things," she said finally, a bit crossly. "Welcome to my life," Harry said, and she laughed despite herself, and Ron looked between them from behind his breakfast with the satisfied expression of someone watching 2 people he cares about be all right. The mirror found him in May. He'd been following a hunch, not a Speed Force hunch, an ordinary human one, about the 3rd-floor corridor. Quirrell was moving more frequently now, and the shade had been in the forest 3 nights running, and everything felt like it was compressing toward a point. Harry had been trying to map the castle's protective layers by feel, walking the areas near the forbidden corridor and letting the hum tell him what it picked up. It was an imprecise method. Hermione found it scientifically unsatisfying. It worked anyway. That was how he ended up in an empty classroom on the 4th floor, having followed a pull in the hum that led him through 2 wrong rooms and a trick staircase, finding something he hadn't known was there. The Mirror of Erised was enormous and ornately framed and shouldn't have been in a 4th floor classroom, and the moment Harry walked through the door, the hum went from a pull to a full resonant chord recognition, the way it had recognized the holly and phoenix feather wand in Ollivander's shop. He approached it carefully. The figure in the mirror was him. Unmistakably him, same face, same glasses, same build. But older not by much, maybe a year or 2, and the reflected Harry was standing in open space. Not a room, somewhere vast and bright with the suggestion of movement all around him. Lightning moved at his hands, not dangerously, not destructively, just present the way light is present, like it belonged there. The reflected Harry was grinning. Harry looked at this for a long time. Most people, he suspected, saw loved ones in this mirror, family, a future they wanted. He saw himself, confident and powerful and uncontained, lightning at his fingertips in a world with enough room to run in. He reached out and touched the mirror's surface, and the hum surged, and for one split, impossible second, the reflection reached back. Their fingers met the glass from opposite sides, and in that contact Harry saw the future, not the reflections present wherever that was, but the actual future, a cascade of images arriving too fast to process individually. A dark chamber beneath the school, a chess set, a door of fire, a man with no face and a stone in his hand, red eyes in a mirror in this mirror, and a voice that was and wasn't Quirrell saying, "Potter, I've been waiting." He pulled his hand back. Stood breathing in the empty classroom, the mirror watching him with his own grinning face. "Useful," he said to the mirror, to himself, to no one. He pulled out a scrap of parchment and wrote down everything he'd seen, every image in sequence, and read it back, and the picture it assembled was clear enough. The stone, soon, him going down, not because he had to, because he was going to choose to. He went and found Ron and Hermione. He told them what he'd seen, and Hermione's response was immediate. "The mirror is here, in the castle. Dumbledore brought it here, which means Dumbledore is using it as a protection. Whatever gets past the Cerberus and the other layers will face the mirror. And the mirror will show them the stone," Harry said, "but anyone who actually wants to use it will just see themselves using it. They won't be able to get it out." "Exactly," she was writing now, the quill moving fast. "Unless the person who approaches it genuinely only wants to find it and not use it. Then they'd see themselves finding it," Harry said, "and the stone would appear in their pocket. That's the logic of it." "Yes," she looked up. "You saw yourself in the mirror as you want to be, not holding the stone. So if you approach it, the stone appears, and I have it before Voldemort can get anywhere near it." "Except," Ron said, "that we don't know what else is between the dog and the mirror, and if Quirrell gets there first." "He won't," Harry said. "You don't know." "Ron," Harry said it calmly, without impatience. "I run faster than time, he won't get there first." Ron absorbed this. "Right," he said, "fair enough, but we're going with you." Harry looked at him. He'd expected an argument about safety, about waiting, about telling a teacher. He hadn't expected this. "Ron, it could be dangerous," Ron said. "Yes," noted, still going. He picked up a bishop from the chessboard between them and turned it over in his fingers. "We play as a team, always." Harry looked at Hermione. She had already put her quill down. "Obviously I'm going," she said, with the faint irritation of someone who considers the question answered. Harry looked between them. Outside the common room window, the evening was settling into dark, the grounds going blue-gray in the early summer dusk. The fire behind them was warm. The castle was quiet in that May way, heavy with exams and the beginning of year's end feeling. He hadn't had people before, not like this, not people who said, "Obviously I'm going," and meant it. "All right," he said, "then we go together." They didn't go that night or the next. What they did instead was prepare, with a thoroughness that was primarily Hermione's doing. She identified the likely protections based on the professor's specialties: Sprout for the grounds, Flitwick for enchantments, McGonagall for transfiguration, Snape for potions. She mapped each layer and what it would require to pass through it. She practiced everything until it was automatic. Harry, meanwhile, was working on something of his own. He'd been experimenting with vibration ever since the lake in December, the water ripple, the first real proof that what he could do wasn't just velocity but energy, directional and controllable. He could vibrate his hand now with precision, could tune the frequency the way you tune a string, higher for finer work, lower for greater force. He could push through solid objects at the right frequency, which was a sensation he had no intention of explaining to anyone until he'd thoroughly gotten used to it himself. Because the first time he'd put his hand through the library wall, he'd stood very still for about 30 seconds waiting for his brain to accept what had happened. He could phase. He practiced it in the dormitory at night, sitting cross-legged on his bed with his hand extended, vibrating through varying densities: wood, stone, glass. Glass was the hardest, stone was the most interesting. It had its own frequency, old and deep and structural, and if he matched it exactly, he could feel the castle's bones the way you feel a building's pipes when they move water. He was going to need it. The mirror's frame was solid enchanted stone. If the stone appeared and then locked itself back in the glass for safety, which it might if the enchantment was sophisticated, he needed to be able to reach through the frame itself and retrieve it. He was also practicing something else: speed in enclosed spaces. Running straight line fast was one thing. Moving at full speed in a dungeon, through narrow passages, around obstacles, without destroying everything he touched, that was technique, and technique required repetition. He ran the Hogwarts dungeons 5 nights in a row until he had every turn memorized and could navigate them in the dark at a fraction below full speed without touching a wall. Snape caught him on the 4th night. Harry had come around a corner and there was Snape, standing in the corridor with his arms folded and the expression of someone who has decided to find something more exasperating than surprising. "Potter," Snape said. "Professor," Harry said. Snape looked at the scorch marks Harry had left on the corridor floor, faint half-circles of heat impression on the stone. He looked at Harry, he looked at the scorch marks again. "You are mapping the dungeons," Snape said, not a question. "Yes," Harry said, "at night. The days are busy." Snape's jaw worked slightly. He looked at the ceiling with the expression of a man conducting an internal conversation that was not going the way he preferred. Then he looked at Harry again. "The passages east of the potions classroom connect to a stairwell," he said, very precisely, looking at a point about 6 inches above Harry's head. "That stairwell has an exit 3 floors above the stone door. The approach from that angle has fewer obstacles." A pause. "I mention it only because inefficient mapping irritates me." He turned and walked away. Harry stood in the dungeon corridor and looked at the spot where Snape had been and thought, "Snape just helped me." He was no longer under any illusion that Snape was simple. The vision in the library was the one that changed things. May was nearly over, exams were actually happening now, and Harry was in the library doing the uncharacteristic thing of actually studying potions theory, which required the kind of memorization he found less natural than the practical. When the hum reached again. Same sideways reach as before, same depth discovering quality. He had less than a second to think, not now, not the library, before the tables and the bookshelves and the scratching quills of 20 other students dissolved. He was at Hogwarts. Unmistakably Hogwarts, same stone, same torchlight, but the space was different. A tower room he didn't know, circular, with windows that showed a sky full of stars that didn't match the current season, which meant this was a long time ago. And in the room there were 2 people. A very old man with a long silver beard and half-moon spectacles sitting at a desk, and a woman, not his mother. Older, gray-haired, with an expression of somebody delivering a verdict they've thought about carefully. "He will come to the end of it," the woman said. "One way or another he will." "I know," the old man said, and Harry recognized the voice, lower than the current version, deeper in the chest, but unmistakably Dumbledore, decades younger. "What I do not know is what he will find when he gets there." "The Force doesn't choose arbitrarily," the woman said. "It chose him for a reason." "It chose James and Lily's son," Dumbledore said. "One might argue it was proximity." "One might argue many things," the woman said crisply. "I have seen 4 chosen in my life, Albus, 4. 2 of them were destroyed by what they carried because no one helped them understand it. One survived but lived at a remove from every human relationship she had because the speed took her out of time. And one, she stopped. One learned to be fully what she was in community with love without apology, and she remade the world she ran through." She set something down on his desk, a small glass object that glittered. "He needs someone to help him understand it." "I know," Dumbledore said again, quieter. "Do something about it," she said, "instead of simply knowing." The library came back. Harry's potions notes were on the table in front of him. Ron was asleep on top of his herbology essay 3 seats down. Hermione was staring at him from across the table with wide eyes. "You were gone," she whispered. "Your eyes went and you weren't here, Harry. You were standing in the library but you were completely absent for almost 2 minutes." "I'm back," he said. "I'm fine." He picked up his quill and held it to stop his hand from doing anything distracting. "Hermione, Dumbledore knows about me." Her expression did the rapid processing thing. "He's known since before Hogwarts, I think, since before I was old enough to understand it myself." He looked at his potions notes. There was a woman in the vision. He called it a force. She said she'd seen 4 people chosen by it. She told him to help me understand it. Hermione was quiet for a moment. "Are you angry?" Harry thought about it. "No," he said, "not yet." He capped his ink bottle. "But I'm going to talk to him. Now, after exams," Harry said, "if there's an after." He glanced toward the library windows, the May evening outside them, the lengthening days. "Things are moving faster. Quirrell's been going to the 3rd floor every other day now. He's close to working out the final protection." "How do you know he hasn't already worked it out?" "Because the stone is still there," Harry said simply. "I can feel it." Hermione looked at him and he could see her choosing again between asking how and accepting the answer. She was getting better at accepting the answer. Then we go soon, she said. Yes, Harry said, we go soon. They went on the 1st of June, not because Harry had a specific premonition, though the hum had been behaving urgently all day, pressing at the inside of his ribs like something that wanted to get out. Not because of anything Quirrell had visibly done. They went because Hermione came into the common room at 7 in the evening with her jaw set and her notes under her arm and said, he went through the door tonight, and that was that. You saw him, Ron said. I saw his turban through the 3rd-floor window, she said. He was coming out. The door was behind him. He looked. She hesitated, satisfied. He's figured out the next layer, Harry said. He's going back tonight to try. Then we go now, Ron said immediately, already standing. They went. The Cerberus was asleep. Hermione had thought this through weeks ago. She played the recorder badly but persistently enough, and the great three-headed thing swayed and closed its eyes in sequence, right head first, then middle, then left, like dominoes falling. Harry had the trapdoor open before the last eye shut. He went first. The drop was long enough that he had time to think, and landed in something soft and green and immediately hungry. Devil's Snare, which Hermione identified from above before he'd registered the constriction, calling instructions down the drop while Ron descended behind him. Harry didn't wait for the instructions. The hum told him what to resist and his body went completely still. The deep stillness of someone whose reflexes have accepted the situation. And the snare released him in confusion. It was adapted to motion, and Harry had given it none, and he stepped out of it while it was still processing and pulled Ron free with both hands before the plant could get a grip. The next chamber had winged keys, which was solved by Harry on a broom with 2 minutes of aerial patience and very good eyes. The next was a giant chessboard, life-sized stone with the grinding thunder of moving pieces, and this was Ron's, plainly and entirely Ron's. He stood in front of the board and assessed it with the concentrated quiet of someone who is genuinely brilliant at one thing and knows it. Let us through, Hermione said to the board, somewhat optimistically. The White Queen turned her stone head. Sit on the pieces, Ron said. We play through. Harry, you're a bishop. Hermione, a rook. I'll take the knight. The game that followed was 8 minutes long, and Harry spent most of it watching Ron move through the logic of it with complete authority, not frantic, not guessing, deliberate, and there was something clarifying about watching someone operate in their own element with that kind of confidence. Ron was not fast. Ron was exact. He saw 4 moves ahead and arranged the board so that the opposition's advantage eroded move by move until the White King had nowhere to go. The Queen took Ron's knight. Not Ron, the stone knight. Ron jumped clear at the last second, hit the marble floor with a sound that made Harry's jaw clench and lay still for a moment. Ron, Harry said immediately. Go, Ron said, not opening his eyes. I'm winded, not dead. Go, Harry went. The next chamber was a troll, already unconscious, dealt with by someone before them, which meant Quirrell was ahead. The next was Snape's potion room, 7 bottles on a table with a logic puzzle Hermione solved in under 3 minutes, her hands moving the parchment with the precision of someone to whom logic is as natural as breathing. She handed Harry the right bottle and he drank it, and the chill of it moved through him like ice water, and the door opened. Flames, he said. I know, she said. Go, I'm going back for Ron. He looked at her, she was already turning. Hermione, he said, she looked back. Thank you, he said, for all of it. She smiled, quick, genuine, not complicated by anything. Don't be too long, she said, and went. Harry walked through the purple flames. The final chamber was dark and smelled of cold stone and something older than the school, something that had been here before the school was built, maybe before the hill was cleared and the foundations laid. The Mirror of Erised was at the far end of it, luminous in its own faint way, catching non-existent light and giving it back doubled. Quirrell was standing in front of it. He turned when Harry entered. His face was Quirrell's, and it was also not. The stutter was gone, had been gone for a while. And whatever had been looking out through those eyes on the staircase in November was looking out fully now, unconstrained. The turban was off. On the back of Quirrell's head, the face was clearly visible in the dim light of the chamber, gaunt and pale and red-eyed, and looking at Harry with an intensity that was almost, very almost, something that could have become fear in a different kind of face. You're quick, Quirrell said, and it was both of them speaking, Quirrell's voice and the one beneath it harmonizing badly. I didn't expect you quite this quickly. I'm told I'm fast, Harry said, looking at the mirror over Quirrell's shoulder. The reflection showed him clearly the older him, relaxed, lightning at his hands, grinning, and in the reflected him's hand, catching the dim light, the philosopher's stone. He didn't look at his reflection for more than a second. The stone, the voice beneath Quirrell said. I see it in the mirror, but I cannot. The enchantment, the red eyes fixed on Harry. You could take it. A boy, a pure intention, you only want to find it, don't you? You could reach in and take it. I could, Harry said. Then do it? A pause, and in the pause was something that Voldemort had not intended to put there, something that was, despite everything, something approaching a request. I am dying, boy. I have been dying for 10 years. You need the stone to come back, Harry said. I know. He took a step toward the mirror. And you killed my parents. Unnecessary, I know, Harry said again, and there was nothing in his voice, no tremble or heat or grief, just acknowledgement, the flat, clear acknowledgement of a fact that he has lived with long enough to have found its permanent shape inside him. I know. You killed them and it didn't work and something reached out and chose me and here we both are. He looked at the mirror. And you need me to get the stone. Yes, Quirrell whispered. No, Harry said. He moved. Full speed, the first time he'd run full speed indoors, and the chamber was big enough that he had 2 strides of actual velocity before he reached the mirror. And in those 2 strides time thinned and he felt the whole room, Quirrell behind him, the stone and the glass, the enchantment on the frame, the depth and weight of the old magic, and he put his hand up and vibrated it at the exact frequency of the mirror's enchanted stone frame. The old frequency, the deep structural one. And phased his hand through the glass entirely. His fingers closed around something warm and smooth, the size and weight of a large walnut radiating heat like a small steady sun. He pulled it back through the glass and closed his fist around it and turned around. He'd been in motion for less than 2 seconds. Quirrell was staring at his closed fist. Give it to me, Quirrell said, and now the harmony between the 2 voices was gone and there was only the one beneath, red-eyed and ancient and very close to something that had a temperature that was cold. Give it to me now, Potter. No, Harry said pleasantly and took a step back. Quirrell moved for him. Harry moved faster. He was half across the chamber before Quirrell's robes had finished swinging from the initial lunge. And what happened next was not a fight in any conventional sense. It was more like watching someone try to catch smoke. Quirrell reached and grabbed and lunged, and Harry was simply elsewhere each time, present and then not present, moving in the margins of the room at speeds that produced a low wind that stirred Quirrell's hair and guttered the torches on the walls. Then Quirrell stopped and did something Harry hadn't anticipated. He stood very still and closed his eyes, and the chamber filled with a silence like pressure, like something was gathering. And when he opened his eyes again, they were entirely red, not flecked with it, entirely, the whites gone, the pupils gone, and the voice that came out of his open mouth was only Voldemort's, thin and enormous at once. Face me, boy. I am facing you, Harry said. You are dancing. A pause. You think speed is enough. Speed is a tool. I have been alive for 60 years, and I have seen every tool imaginable, and I have survived all of them. I have survived death itself. And you are an 11-year-old child with a trick. 2 tricks, Harry said. He crossed the chamber in a blink and put his free hand, vibrating at the highest frequency he'd yet achieved, against Quirrell's chest. Not striking, touching, just touching. But at that frequency the touch passed through Quirrell and made contact with what was living inside him, the thing that was renting his body, and the effect was immediate and violent and clearly not something Voldemort had expected. Quirrell screamed. Not Quirrell, the voice beneath. The thing that had lived in darkness for 10 years and had found a host, and was now in contact with the speed force, direct, unfiltered, the same energy that had destroyed it once before. On the night a curse came back and a woman's love was woven into the air of a nursery, and it could not bear it. Harry held contact for a 3 count and then stepped back. Quirrell collapsed. The face on the back of his head was screaming, mouth open, red eyes wide, and then it was thinning, losing definition, a face pressed to glass from outside, except the glass was giving way and the face was breaking apart. And what left Quirrell's body was a rush of cold air and darkness and a sound that was below sound. And Harry felt it pass through him like a wave, and the hum in his chest met it and pushed back, and it was gone. The chamber was still. Quirrell was on the floor, barely breathing, his skin already the gray of someone whose body has been vacated in a hurry. The back of his head smooth and unmarked as though the second face had never been there. Harry stood in the middle of the chamber with the Philosopher's Stone in his closed fist, warm and steady, and the torches had settled back to their normal rhythm, and the mirror showed only his reflection, older him, lightning hands, grinning, and for a moment the reflection looked directly at him, and lifted one hand in something that was more acknowledgement than wave. Then Dumbledore was at the door. He came through the purple firewall with a speed that belied his age, and took in the chamber with eyes that moved fast and sharp under the half-moon glasses. Quirrell on the floor, Harry standing, the mirror, Harry's closed fist. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Did you take the stone out of the mirror yourself?" "Yes," Harry said and opened his fist. The stone sat in his palm, ruddy and warm. Dumbledore looked at it. He looked at Harry. And then, for the first time since Harry had come to Hogwarts, for the first time in their limited but weighted acquaintance, Dumbledore looked genuinely, completely surprised. "How?" he said, not grandly, not rhetorically, a plain question, the question of a man encountering something outside his map. "I phased through the glass," Harry said. "It's something I can do." Dumbledore was quiet for another moment. The speed force, he said softly. Harry looked up sharply. You know about it. I know of it, Dumbledore said carefully. I know that it is ancient and that it chooses rarely and that it has not chosen in a very long time. He held out his hand for the stone. I know that the woman who told me about it 30 years ago in that office upstairs was correct when she said I should have done something to help you understand it sooner. A long pause. She also said I would not and that you would figure it out anyway. She was right on both counts. Harry placed the stone in Dumbledore's palm. We need to talk, Harry said. Properly, not hints and mystery, actually talk. Yes, Dumbledore said, and he sounded for the first time like a man who has been waiting to say that word for a while. We do. He looked at the unconscious form of Quirrell, but perhaps not quite yet. No, Harry agreed, not quite yet. He looked at the mirror one more time. The reflection had gone back to normal, older him, lightning hands, the familiar grin, and outside the castle, somewhere in the forbidden forest, something dark and formless shifted between the trees, feeding on the death energy that had just poured out of a dying man's body, growing more solid by the moment. The hum in Harry's chest registered it and said nothing. It was patient. It knew what was coming. So did Harry. Chapter 4. Faster than a soul can fall. Summer came and went the way summers do when you're carrying something heavy, too fast in the good parts, too slow in the parts where you're alone with your thoughts. Harry spent 6 weeks at the Dursleys and used every one of them running. Not speed force running, ordinary running, trainers on pavement, the suburban streets of Little Winging at 5 in the morning when nobody was awake to watch. He needed the rhythm of it, the physical simplicity, the way a long run empties the mind, the way ringing empties a cloth. He'd replayed the chamber under Hogwarts approximately 400 times, not obsessively, analytically. The way you replay a chess game, you've won to understand why each move worked. Because winning without understanding is just luck, and luck is not a strategy. He'd moved fast enough to get there before Quirrell finished working out the mirror's enchantment. He'd phased through glass first time under pressure, which was not ideal for a new technique. He'd made contact with something that had killed his parents, and he'd stood in a stone chamber with it and said no without his voice shaking. He'd also felt in the 3 count when he'd held contact with Quirrell's chest, something he hadn't told anyone yet. Voldemort wasn't gone. Dispersed, weakened further than he'd already been, forced out of his host, reduced to whatever form a thing takes when it has no body and no stone and nothing left to anchor it to the physical world. But the red-eyed consciousness that had looked out through Quirrell's face had not simply ceased to exist when Harry's vibrating hand pushed the speed force through it. It had scattered. Like smoke in wind, same matter, different arrangement. It was out there somewhere, in the thin places where things go when they're not quite alive but not quite dead. Harry knew this the way he knew the frequency of old stone, not because someone told him, because he'd touched it. He didn't find it worrying. He found it useful to know. He was also, during those 6 weeks, thinking about what Dumbledore had said. The woman who told me about it 30 years ago, he wanted to know who she was. He wanted to know about the 4 chosen, the 2 who were destroyed, the one who lived at a remove, the one who remade the world. He wanted to understand the full shape of what he was carrying before he walked back into Hogwarts and whatever came next. The conversation with Dumbledore, promised in a stone chamber in June, had been brief and inadequate. Dumbledore in hospital mode. Harry in hospital mode. Ron with a minor concussion from the chessboard. Hermione with the expression of someone managing several things simultaneously and doing it flawlessly. They'd talked in the hospital wing for 20 minutes about the stone and Quirrell and Voldemort's continued existence, and Dumbledore had said the longer conversation would happen, and Harry had said he was holding him to it. And then the school year had ended and they'd all gone home. He wrote Hermione 4 letters and Ron 6 during the summer. Hermione's letters were dense with research. She'd found one reference to the Speed Force in a 19th century text on primordial magics. She wrote half a paragraph buried in a chapter about forces that predate formal magical theory, referring to the lightning current and its relationship to what the text called the membrane of time. She'd underlined the relevant passage and sent the page with the letter. Harry read it 3 times and filed it next to the vision of the woman in Dumbledore's tower office, and felt the shape of something larger assembling itself at the edges of his understanding. Ron's letters contained Quidditch news, Fred and George's latest experiment with canary creams, and at the end of the 4th letter, in handwriting that was slightly more careful than Ron's usual scrawl, I keep thinking about the chess room. I keep thinking about the fact that you and Hermione went forward and I stayed on the floor. I know you're going to say that's not how it was. I'm saying it anyway so I can stop thinking it. Harry wrote back immediately, you played the game that got us through. Your concussion from taking the hit that got us to checkmate. If that's what you call staying on the floor, I'd hate to see what you consider actually contributing. Come off it, Ron. He didn't know if it helped. He hoped it did. He got back on the Hogwarts Express on September 1st with the specific feeling of someone returning to the place where the important things happen, and found his compartment and his people in it. And Hermione immediately produced her notebook and Ron immediately produced food, and the three of them sat in the rattling warmth of the train and talked about everything and nothing, and it was better than the whole summer put together. The shade came up halfway through the journey. It's been active, Hermione said, low enough that the passing trolley witch didn't catch it. There were 3 incidents in the forest in August. Hagrid wrote he wrote to Dumbledore, but he mentioned it in his letter to Harry. 2 more dead unicorns and a Thistral that, she stopped. That what? Ron said. That vanished, she said. Not died, vanished, as in the shade consumed it entirely. She looked at Harry. It's stronger, significantly stronger, and it's been feeding consistently since June. Since Quirrell, Harry said. Since Voldemort left a body, she confirmed. Harry looked out the window at the passing countryside. The death energy from Quirrell's abandoned host, he'd felt it happening in the chamber. The rush of cold and dark that had poured out when Voldemort scattered. He'd felt it going outward, and he'd felt the thing in the forest register it from miles away, a ripple in the hum that had been a ripple in something larger. It's been waiting for a feast, he said. And it got one, Hermione agreed. Ron was looking between them with the expression he wore when a situation was becoming more serious than he'd hoped. So it's a bigger shade than it was in February, he said. Can you still outrun it? In February I could run around it, Harry said. That's not the same as outrunning it. It doesn't move through space the way I do. He watched a hill slide past the window. It moves through time, or rather it moves between moments. Which means I can't just be faster, I have to be smarter. So what's the plan? Ron said. Talk to Dumbledore, Harry said. Actually talk to him this time and then figure out what the shade actually is. I have a theory, Hermione said, in the tone she used for theories she was quite confident in. Tell me, Harry said. She opened her notebook. The speed force, the lightning current, whatever it actually is, was created by a collision of opposites in a single point. Your mother's love and Voldemort's killing curse, 2 absolutes, equal and opposite reaction. A positive force went into you, she paused. A negative force had to go somewhere. The shade, Harry said. The speed force's shadow, she said. It's dark mirror, made of the same event that made you but inverted. Where you carry life and motion, it carries death and stillness. Where you move forward through time, it moves backward, feeding on endings, on magical deaths, on things that were alive and aren't. And it's connected to me, Harry said. It recognized you in December. It communicated with you in February. It tracks the stone which it can't use, but it's drawn to the same things you're drawn to because we came from the same place, Harry said. You're 2 sides of the same event, she said. Which means, to stop it permanently I have to deal with it at the source. He thought about this, which means going back to where the speed force is. He said it plainly, without drama, somewhere inside the force itself. The compartment was quiet for a moment. Right, Ron said. That sounds completely normal and fine, Harry smiled. We're not doing it yet, 1st year. 2nd year, Ron said. 2nd year, Harry agreed. 2nd year arrived in the form of Gilderoy Lockhart. Harry met him in Flourish and Blots during the summer shopping trip, and formed an immediate opinion that he was too well-mannered to share in public. Lockhart had the energy of someone whose confidence and competence were not on speaking terms, all surface and charm and perfectly arranged hair. The kind of man who considers having his picture taken to be a legitimate professional achievement. He also spotted Harry immediately, the way people who want an audience always spotted him, and attempted to use him for a photo opportunity. Wonderful, Lockhart said, one arm around Harry's shoulders and facing the photographer with teeth that were doing most of the work. Harry Potter and Gilderoy Lockhart, both at Flourish and Blots on the same day, what are the odds? Fairly high, Harry said pleasantly, given that it's the designated shopping day for Hogwarts students and you've been here since this morning signing books. The photographer kept shooting. Lockhart's smile stayed in place. His eyes, Harry noticed, did not. Quite right, Lockhart said, releasing him. Sharp boy. I've been told, Harry said, and went to find Hermione. Lockhart, installed as the defense against the dark arts professor, was exactly as advertised, impressive to look at, unimpressive to experience. His lessons a carefully managed performance that substituted enthusiasm for competence and hoped nobody looked too closely. Harry sat in the 3rd row and was perfectly respectful and took his notes and left every lesson feeling slightly cheated of something he'd needed. He also noticed, early in the term, that Lockhart was frightened. Not of anything specific, frightened in the way of someone maintaining something and terrified of being asked to demonstrate it without preparation. Every time Harry asked a direct question in class, not to embarrass him genuinely, because Harry wanted to learn, Lockhart's eyes did a small, quick calculation before he answered. The look of a man finding the path between the question and a response that sounds like an answer without being one. He filed Lockhart in a mental folder labeled not a threat but not a resource and got on with it. The first writing appeared on the wall in October. The chamber of SCCRETS has been OPENED. Enemies of the air beware. Mrs. Norris, Filch's cat, hung stiff-bodied from a torch bracket below it, and the corridor had the silence of something very recent and very wrong. Harry found it with nearly headless Nick and half the school shuffling out of the Halloween feast. And the hum spiked immediately, not the shade's predator silence, something different. Something layered and old, like the first time he'd felt the castle's structural frequency but deeper, accessing something that was in the school's foundations rather than its stone. Dumbledore crouched beside Mrs. Norris and examined her with eyes that moved carefully, and Snape stood with his arms folded and an expression that was hard to read at that angle, and Lockhart offered 3 separate opinions on what had happened, each one confidently delivered and factually empty. Petrified, Dumbledore said quietly, not dead. Harry noted this carefully, petrified, suspended, something that preferred its victims motionless rather than dead. She can be cured, Hermione said beside him. Mandrake restorative draft, sprouts growing mandrakes, I saw them in the greenhouses last week. How long? Harry said quietly. Months, they need to mature. Harry filed this away and watched Snape's eyes in the torchlight and thought about the frequency he'd felt under the corridor, deep and old and something that had been in the school for a very long time without anyone above it noticing. The hum had found it. Whatever was down there had a presence. He just needed to understand it. Lockhart's dueling club in November was useful for exactly one thing. It introduced Harry to Parseltongue. The club itself was predictable. Lockhart pranced. Snape dismantled him with elegant economy while maintaining a perfectly neutral expression that somehow communicated contempt across the entire Great Hall. Students paired off and pointed wands at each other with varying degrees of commitment, and Draco Malfoy released a conjured snake on Justin Finch-Fletchley, and the snake reared back and Harry said, "Leave him alone, he hasn't done anything to you," which was not what the rest of the room heard. The rest of the room heard hissing. The Great Hall went very quiet and very still with the specific quality of a room in which something significant has just revealed itself. And Harry stood with his wand down and looked at the snake, which had subsided and was now looking at him with the polite interest of something that has been spoken to in its own language, and looked at the faces around him, Ron, pale, Hermione, rapidly processing, Draco, unreadable for once, the rest of the student body somewhere between fascinated and alarmed. He'd understood the snake had understood him. He'd assumed that was normal. He'd assumed, absently, the same way he'd assumed lots of things about himself were normal before Hagrid showed up and explained that they weren't. That's Parseltongue, Hermione said that night, the 3 of them in the common room with the fire burning down, talking to snakes. It's considered a dark magic ability, historically associated with dark wizards, Harry said, and Salazar Slytherin. Yes. Ron, who had recovered his color but not his equanimity, said, and Voldemort. Yes, Hermione said. She was looking at Harry with the expression of someone constructing a theory in real time. Harry, the scar. The connection between you and Voldemort is, what if it's more than just the speed force? What if the night his curse rebounded, something of Voldemort was transferred, an ability he had passing into you because he touched me, Harry said, or tried to, or part of him latched on. He thought about the flutter of awareness at the edge of the scattered Voldemort's consciousness, the thing he hadn't told anyone about, and decided this was the moment. He's not gone, he said. They both looked at him. I told you he was dispersed, scattered, he is, he leaned forward, but I can feel where he went. When I go very fast into the deep speed force past the first and second thresholds, there's something there that shouldn't be there, something cold and without direction but present. He's in there somewhere, in the thin places between moments. Hermione had gone very still. If he's in the thin places, she said carefully, and the shade moves through the thin places, they could find each other, Harry said. The fire crackled. The common room was empty except for them. Right, Ron said. So we need to figure out the chamber before the shade and Voldemort have a reunion. He looked at the fire. How long have we got? Long enough, Harry said, but not long. He found the chamber's entrance in December. He'd been following the frequency, the deep structural one, the thing under the castle's foundations, and it had led him through most of the school's lower levels over 3 separate nights, the hum directing him the way water finds the path downhill. On the 3rd night it led him to the girls' bathroom on the 2nd floor, and he stood in it with Hermione's permission. She was with him, armed with her notebook and an expression that dared any ghost to make a comment about the situation, and examined the sink. There was a small snake scratched into the bronze tap. Harry looked at it. He said in the language that he apparently spoke without having learned, "Open." The sink descended. He went down first into a pipe that dropped into a dark tunnel, landing easily at the bottom in a crouch with the hum steady and navigational. Hermione landed beside him less elegantly but without injury. They looked at the tunnel, long, dark, arched with ancient stone that had a different quality to the school above, older, more deliberate, built for a purpose, not for use. They went in. It took 12 minutes at a normal walk, which meant Harry could cover it in seconds, but he walked it with Hermione at a pace she could manage while writing notes by wandlight, because information mattered and she was right to gather it. The basilisk skin they found, shed, enormous, she photographed from 3 angles and wrote measurements for. The chamber proper was long and greenlit and columned with stone serpents, and Harry walked through it with the hum running at a frequency it reserved for things of genuine significance. And at the far end he found a statue of a man whose face had been worn by time into a suggestion of features rather than features themselves. And beside the statue's base he found Ginny Weasley. She was on the floor, eyes closed, barely breathing, her hand loose around a diary that was open and blank. Harry crossed the chamber to her in a moment and crouched and put 2 fingers against her throat and found a pulse, thin but there, the pulse of someone who hasn't quite left yet, and looked up at the statue and then at the diary and understood immediately, with the cold, clear certainty of someone who has encountered Voldemort before and forms his age shouldn't have needed to encounter. "She's not dead," said Tom Riddle. He was standing 10 feet back, between 2 columns, a boy of about 16 with dark hair and a face that was handsome in the specific way that charm wears when it's being used as a tool. It was not quite solid. You could see the stone of the column through his arm if you looked directly at the intersection, and he was holding Harry's wand. Harry stood up. He looked at his wand in Riddle's hand and then at Riddle. "Give that back," Harry said. In a moment, Riddle said pleasantly, "I've been looking forward to meeting you, Harry Potter, the boy who became famous because of me, or rather because of what I tried to do to him. There's a symmetry there that I appreciate." "The diary," Harry said. "You've been possessing her through the diary." "Draining her, technically," Riddle said. "She poured her soul into these pages and I consumed it and became more real. Or present, it's a straightforward transaction." He tilted his head. "You know, you're considerably more calm than I expected." "Should I not be?" Harry said. "Most people who find a girl dying on a chamber floor and a shade of Voldemort standing over her become at least somewhat emotional." "I'm going to fix both of those things," Harry said, "and being emotional won't help." He looked at Ginny. Her lips were blue at the edges. "What do you need to finish the transfer to become fully solid?" Riddle looked at him with interest. "Her life," he said. "What remains of it?" "You're not taking it," Harry said. "I have your wand," Riddle said. "Yes," Harry said. "That's a problem for you, not for me." Riddle raised the wand and cast. Harry was already not where he'd been, moved before the spell reached the air, 3 columns down in a fraction of a second, and the spell hit stone and scattered. Riddle cast again, tracking faster than someone who couldn't see properly should have been able to track. The diary's accumulated memory of Voldemort included, apparently, some tactical intelligence, and Harry stayed ahead of it. He was thinking while he moved. The wand he could retrieve. He could move fast enough to take it from Riddle's hand without Riddle being able to react. But Riddle was a memory, partially manifest, drawing power from Ginny's fading life force. The wand would stop him casting. It wouldn't stop the drain. He needed to destroy the diary. He needed something to destroy it with, a crash from the tunnel entrance, something large and enthusiastic arriving in the chamber at speed. Harry glanced back and found, improbably and brilliantly, a bird. A scarlet phoenix burning bright, its cry ringing off the stone columns like struck crystal, carrying something in its talons. A worn leather hat that Harry recognized. The sorting hat hit the chamber floor and Harry crossed to it in a tenth of a second. Riddle fired again, the spell singing past Harry's ear, close, the closest yet, and Harry grabbed the sorting hat and shook it and something slid out of it. A sword. Silver and goblin-made and ancient with rubies in the hilt, and it was made for someone taller, and Harry was currently 12 and none of this mattered even slightly. He caught it by the hilt and his hand vibrated, not a choice, an instinct. The speed force reading the object and harmonizing with it, ruby-red frequency matching something at the hilt's core, and the blade sang. He took Riddle's wand on the next pass. Simply took it, full speed, hand out, Riddle's fingers registering no resistance before Harry was 10 feet past and both wands were in his hands. He tossed his own wand to his right hand and held the sword in his left and turned around. "You move differently than my memories," Riddle said. There was something new in his voice, not fear, not exactly, but adjustment, recalculation. "What are you?" "Something new," Harry said. He vibrated the sword. Not at structural frequency, at the frequency of the diary. He'd read it when Riddle manifested, felt the resonance of the object, the incanned memory construction that anchored him. It was dense and deliberate and Voldemort-made, which meant it was powerful, which meant the counter-frequency needed to match it exactly. He tuned the blade the way he tuned his hand, micro-adjustments in the vibration, and the air around the sword began to blur, and the rubies in the hilt began to glow, and Riddle watched this with the first expression Harry had seen on his borrowed face that was genuinely unguarded. He drove the sword into the diary. not physically into it, through it. Phase the vibrating blade through the cover and into the pages and let the speed force frequency ring through the object from the inside. And the diary came apart not with drama but with completeness. Ink spraying outward in black jets as though the pages were bleeding, the cover splitting, the whole object unraveling at a frequency that matched its internal construction so precisely that it couldn't reassemble or defend. Tom Riddle screamed. Not like a boy, not like a teenager. Like the thing he actually was, old and desperate and terrified of unexistence in the way that only things that have spent considerable effort avoiding death can be, and he came apart faster than the diary did, his not-quite-solid form losing cohesion from the edges inward, and the last thing visible was the handsome borrowed face with its unguarded expression, and then that was gone too. The chamber was quiet. Ginny gasped. A breath sudden and full, as though the drain had been cut and the life came back rushing in. Her eyes opened, brown and confused and terrified, and she looked up at Harry crouching over her and tried to make sense of what she was seeing, a boy in a dim greenlit stone chamber with a sword and 2 wands and a phoenix sitting on his shoulder like an afterthought. "It's all right," Harry said. "It's over, you're fine." "The diary," she said, her voice wrecked. "I didn't know, I didn't understand, I thought it was just—" "I know," he said. "It was designed to be convincing." He looked at Fawkes, who regarded him with amber eyes and extraordinary dignity. "Can you carry her out?" Fawkes trilled once, "Yes, obviously, that is within my capabilities and frankly you needn't ask," and settled near Ginny with the patient authority of a creature that has been performing rescues longer than the school has existed. Harry picked up the destroyed diary by its ruined cover carefully and looked at it. He thought, there's more of these. There's more pieces of him somewhere. He didn't say it to Ginny. She was 12 and she'd just had her life force drained for months by a memory of Voldemort living in her journal. And some things could wait until later. He said it to himself quietly, and the hum confirmed it, resonating with the frequency of the destroyed Horcrux, which was a word he didn't know yet, but the concept was already forming, the shape of it assembling itself the way shapes do when you've been paying the right kind of attention. He followed Fawkes and Ginny back through the chamber. Lucius Malfoy was waiting at the entrance to the girls' bathroom. This was unexpected. He was standing with his cane and his immaculate robes and Dobby, the small, large-eyed house elf that Harry had met the previous summer, who had been leaving escalating warnings about returning to Hogwarts, huddled behind his leg with the posture of something that has been broken into shape rather than grown into it. Harry came up out of the sink pipe and took all of this in. Lucius looked at him the way his son had looked at him on the Quidditch pitch, but colder, the recalculation, the same recalculation, but done by someone older and more practiced and better at not letting it show. Ginny was on the bathroom floor, recovering. Dobby was not looking at Harry, which meant Dobby very much wanted to look at Harry. "Mr. Potter," Lucius said, "quite the year you've had." "Seems like every year," Harry said. "The chamber," Lucius said, looking at the open pipe in the sink. "You found it." "And closed it," Harry said. "The girl is safe, not a question." "Yes." Something moved in Lucius Malfoy's face briefly that Harry filed without comment. Then it was gone and the smooth exterior was back. "Dumbledore should have been able to handle." "Dumbledore wasn't there," Harry said. "I was." He looked at Lucius calmly. "The diary, the one Ginny had, I think you know where she got it." Lucius went very still. Harry held his gaze. Not aggressively, he had no particular interest in a confrontation with Lucius Malfoy in a second-floor bathroom, and he had nothing to prove. He just wanted the man to understand clearly that Harry knew, that Harry had worked it out and was not confused about it and was not afraid of the knowing. "You put it in her cauldron," Harry said. "In Diagon Alley, in Flourish and Blots, I saw you bump into her father. I didn't understand what I was seeing at the time." He tilted his head. "I understand it now." Lucius looked at him with an expression that was working very hard to be arrogance. Underneath it, the recalculation was happening again, fast and private. This boy. This 12-year-old boy who had been in the chamber and come back with a sword and Fawkes on his shoulder and more information than he should have. "Be careful, Potter," Lucius said softly. "The world is larger than you currently understand." "I know," Harry said. "I'm working on it." He looked at Dobby. He thought for a moment. He looked at the destroyed diary in his hand. He pulled off his trainer. He pulled off his sock, slightly dirty, currently carrying the scent of ancient chamber floor, and stuffed it into the diary's ruined cover. He held it out. "Here," he said to Lucius. "This is yours." Lucius took it on instinct, peered at it with disdain. Then on instinct of a different kind, something trained and reflexive, he said, "Take it," and threw the ruined diary sock combination at Dobby, because that was what you did with things you didn't want, you gave them to the elf. Dobby caught it. Dobby looked at the sock. Dobby's eyes filled with tears of an entirely different quality to his usual expression of miserable suffering. These were tears of pure, overwhelming shock, and he looked up at Harry with an expression that was too large for his small face. And Harry looked back and nodded once, and Dobby was free. What followed involved considerable emotion on Dobby's part and considerably more shouting on Lucius's part, and a brief threat that Harry received with complete equanimity, and Lucius abandoned when he looked into Harry's face and found nothing there he could leverage. Lucius Malfoy left. The Hum watched him go. "You'll be all right," Harry said to Dobby. "Dobby is free," Dobby said with the precision of someone saying the most important sentence they have ever said. "Dobby is free." "Good," Harry said simply. Be well. February, and the shade made its third appearance. Not in the forest, in the school. Harry felt it before anyone else, the predator silence descending at 9:30 on a Wednesday night, the Hum going to that specific 0 while he was in the common room reading. He was on his feet before Ron had looked up from the chess board. "Where?" Hermione said immediately. "Somewhere in the dungeons," Harry said. He was already at the portrait hole. "Harry," Ron started. "Stay here," Harry said, not because he thought they'd be in danger, he wasn't sure about that. Because whatever the shade had come for, he wanted to face it without managing anyone else's safety simultaneously. This felt like a conversation, not a battle. "Stay, I'll be back." He went. Full speed through the corridors, stairwells blurring, torches streaming in his wake. The school at night, a landscape of shadow and orange light that he navigated from memory, taking Snape's suggested route without thinking about it. The dungeons arrived, and the shade's presence was everywhere at once, not a location but a temperature, a particular stillness in the air that was colder than the potions classroom ever was. He found it in the corridor outside the Slytherin common room. It was bigger. Not significantly, not doubled, but unmistakably more present than in February of last year. More defined at the edges. It occupied the corridor the way fog occupies low ground, from wall to wall, and the torches on either side of it had gone out. In their absence, the shade provided its own non-illumination, the way a void is visible because everything around it has light and the void doesn't. A second-year Slytherin student was on the floor at its edge. Not dead, Harry checked immediately, crossing to the boy in a fraction of a second, crouching, 2 fingers to the throat. Pulse present. Eyes open and empty, the look of someone who has been emptied temporarily, like a vessel briefly inverted. The boy would be fine. In minutes or hours he'd be fine. Harry stood up. "I know you're not random," he said to the shade. "I know you came here specifically." He watched the darkness. "He's not here. Voldemort's not in Hogwarts. He scattered in June and he's in the thin places and you won't find him here." The cold pressure arrived, different from February, more complex, more layered, not just the one message now but several arriving in sequence. "You destroyed a piece of him." "Yes," Harry said, "the piece called to me, called to what I am." "Because you're the same energy," Harry said, "the inverse." The Horcrux, he used the word he'd worked out from the diary's frequency, from the concept that had been assembling itself since June. The Horcrux used the same dark energy you're made of, death magic, soul fracture. A pause in the pressure, the shade's approximation of a pause, then there are more. Harry breathed out slowly. "I know. They call to me, I can feel them." "How many?" Harry said. The shade didn't answer this directly. Instead it pressed an image, not a number but a sense of distributed presence. Multiple points of cold dark energy scattered through the world like dropped coins, each one a piece of the same cold and ancient consciousness. "Can you find them?" Harry said. Cold deepened. The shade moved, not toward him, not away, but laterally, which was interesting, which was not the movement pattern it had used before. Lateral was consideration. "Then why would I help you?" "Because Voldemort coming back doesn't help you either," Harry said. "You feed on magical death, small amounts contained. Voldemort coming back in a body means a war. And a war means the kind of death that's too large, too hot, too much. It drowns you or it makes you something different than you are." He held the shade's not gaze. "You're not a weapon, you're a force. Forces don't want to be weaponized." Another long pause. Then the shade withdrew, laterally again, into the wall, through it, gone. The torches relit. The corridor warmed in degrees. The Slytherin student on the floor blinked and sat up and looked around with the expression of someone who has had a very small piece of their consciousness temporarily borrowed and returned slightly wrinkled. Harry helped him up and sent him toward the Slytherin common room and stood alone in the corridor for a moment. The shade had not said yes. But it had also not said number, and it had not attacked him. And it had told him about the Horcruxes, which meant it was calculating, weighing outcomes, deciding which future served its interests. It was not an enemy. It was not an ally. It was something older and stranger than either, something that existed at the intersection of the speed, force, and death, made from the same night that made Harry and moving through the world according to its own ancient logic. He thought, "I need to understand you better, before I can do what I'm going to have to do." He went back upstairs. Ron and Hermione were at the portrait hole when he arrived, both of them in their dressing gowns and looking at him with the particular expression of people who said they would stay and then did not stay. "Well," Ron said, "we have more to deal with than I thought," Harry said. The shade, and Voldemort. And the fact that there are more pieces of him scattered around. He climbed through the portrait hole, and the fact that the shade might help us find them if it decides to, Hermione was already writing. The thin places, she said without looking up. The speed force's margins, that's where the Horcruxes will register most clearly. Yes, Harry said, so you'll need to go deeper than you've gone, she said, deeper than the visions, deeper than the second threshold. Yes, she looked up. Not tonight. No, he agreed, not tonight. He sat down in his chair by the fire. The hum was running quiet and deep and patient, the way it did when it knew something significant was approaching and was conserving itself for it. But soon, Hermione said and went back to writing. Above the school, the stars were out, bright and cold over the forbidden forest where something dark and formless drifted between the trees. More solid now than it had ever been, following the thread of Horcrux energy through the world's dark margins, pulling on it the way a fisherman pulls a line, carefully, methodically, toward a conclusion it was beginning to understand. And in the common room, Harry Potter sat with his friends in the firelight and felt the speed force hum at the base of his breastbone like a second heart that had always known where this was going. He closed his eyes and let it run. Chapter 5. Outrunning death itself. It started with the students collapsing. March came in on a cold wind that rattled the castle's upper windows. And on the third day of the month, a fifth-year Hufflepuff named Alara Bones dropped her breakfast tray in the Great Hall and sat down hard on the stone floor with her eyes open and nothing behind them. By the time Madame Pomfrey arrived, 2 more students had gone the same way, a Ravenclaw 3rd year and a Gryffindor 7th year, both conscious, both breathing, both entirely absent behind the eyes, not petrified, not cursed, not sick, emptied. Harry felt at the moment the first one happened, the hum went to that predator silence and then came back wrong, too quick, jittery in a way it had never been before. Like a compass in a magnetic storm, the needle spinning without settling. He was across the Great Hall before the breakfast crowd had registered that something had gone wrong, crouching beside Alara Bones while Madame Pomfrey was still pushing through the crowd. And he put his fingers to her wrist and felt the pulse, present but thin as paper, as though whatever animated the body was barely maintaining its investment in the effort. He looked up and met Hermione's eyes across the hall. She'd already gone pale. By noon, 7 students were down. By dinner, 11. Madame Pomfrey's ward was full for the first time in the school's recorded history with patients who were not injured, not ill, not cursed, simply draining, life force diminishing in tiny steady increments like water through a crack in a dam. Dumbledore walked the corridors of the school that evening with an expression Harry had not seen on him before, controlled urgency, the look of a man who has encountered something outside his considerable experience and is determining how to respond without the response itself causing panic. He spoke to the heads of house. He sent owls. He convened the staff. Harry didn't wait for the convening. He went to Hermione and Ron in the library at 9 that evening and said, "It's the shade, it's feeding on them." Hermione had 7 books open and her notebook filled to 3/4 already. "It's not feeding the way it fed on the unicorns," she said. "It's not consuming them, it's taking small amounts from many sources simultaneously, efficiently." She looked up. "It's distributing its feeding. Like it's trying not to be noticed while drawing as much as possible from. It's building up to something," Harry said. "Yes," she said. "But to what?" Ron beside her said. "The thin places. You said Voldemort's in the thin places. If the shade has enough energy, it could pull him out," Harry said quietly. "Voldemort scattered in June of last year. He's in the Speed Force's margins, unfixed, without form. The shade is the dark mirror of the Speed Force. If it accumulates enough death energy," he stopped, looked at the table. "It could bridge the gap, pull him through from wherever he is and manifest him." "Give him a body," Ron said. "Give him a body," Harry said, "not necessarily a willing one." The library was quiet. The candles on the tables made small circles of warmth in the dark. Somewhere above them in the hospital wing, 11 students lay on white beds with their eyes open and their life forces leaking out into the stone of the school, traveling downward through foundations laid 1,000 years ago, pooling somewhere deep and cold. "I have to go in," Harry said. They both looked at him. "Into the Speed Force," he said, "all the way in, past every threshold I've found, into the space where the Force actually lives." He looked at his hands spread flat on the library table. "That's where the shade comes from, where it's anchored, where Voldemort is scattered. If I can go in and deal with all 3 of those things at once." "All 3, Hermione repeated. "The shade, Voldemort, and the crack," Harry said. "There's a crack in the Force, that's how both of them exist. The night the killing curse rebounded, it tore something. The Speed Force leaked through and chose me, and the dark mirror leaked through and became the shade. The crack is still there, and as long as it's there, the shade has a connection to this side, and Voldemort has something to anchor to. How do you seal a crack in a fundamental force of the universe?" Ron said, with the genuine intellectual curiosity of someone who has decided that extraordinary is just a variant of ordinary. "I don't know yet," Harry said, "but I know I have to go in to find out." What happens to you if you go that deep? Hermione said. You've been to the second threshold, you've seen visions, at the third threshold you saw your parents, the further you go, the more time comes apart, he said, past and future and present running on top of each other. And if you go all the way into the Force itself, he looked at her, he was honest. I don't know. Harry, Hermione. He said her name the way she said his when she wanted him to actually listen, with weight behind it, and she stopped. I'm not going to die in there. I know that the same way I know structural frequencies and the same way I knew Quirrell was wrong before I knew why he was wrong. The Force doesn't lose its chosen. He paused, but it might try to keep me. The silence was different from the ones before it. Keep you, Ron said. Speed Force is time and motion and energy. It exists outside normal time, always has. If I go all the way in, the part of me that's the Forces might not want to come back. He held their gazes steadily. I'm telling you this because I want you to know the actual risk, not a softened version of it, and I'm telling you I'm going anyway. Ron looked at the table for a moment, then he looked up. What do we do while you're in there? Stay with me, Harry said, physically. My body stops if I go somewhere and it looks like I'm not coming back. You stay with me, both of you, be there when I need to find the way back. What makes you think that'll work? Ron said. Because the Force is made of motion and connection, Harry said, and you're the two best connections I have. Ron looked at Hermione. Hermione looked at Ron. Some communication occurred that didn't require words. All right, Hermione said. When? Tonight, Harry said, before it takes another student. They found a space in the room of requirement. Harry hadn't been sure it would work, but the room gave them what they needed without negotiation. A large circular space, bare stone, no furniture except the stone floor itself, and a quality of quiet that was different from the school's ordinary quiet, more absolute, like a room that understood it was being asked to hold something serious. Harry sat in the center of the floor. Ron and Hermione sat on either side of him close enough to touch, which they were doing, Ron's hand around Harry's left forearm, Hermione's fingers wrapped around his right wrist, steady and present. How long does this take? Ron said. I don't know, Harry said. From the outside it might look like nothing. From the inside, he thought about the visions, how 2 minutes in the library had been a different experience from the inside, full, textured, complete. Could be longer. We'll stay, Hermione said. She said it with the absolute certainty of someone for whom that is not even a question worth finishing. Harry closed his eyes. He let the hum rise, not gradually. He'd been careful with it for 2 years, managing it, maintaining a relationship with it that was deliberate and controlled. Tonight he let go of the control entirely, opened his hands, in a manner of speaking, and let the Force do what it had always wanted to do when he wasn't managing it. The hum rose from chest to throat to skull to extremities in a wave that arrived everywhere simultaneously, and the air in the room changed, pressure dropping, temperature dropping, a sound below sound that made the stone of the walls resonate, and Harry crossed the first threshold like a door being opened. Time thin. He was sitting in the room of requirement, and he was also standing in a dozen other places simultaneously. The corridor outside the Dursleys' cupboard, the Hogwarts Express, the Quidditch pitch, the staircase where Quirrell had turned and the turban had shifted, every significant moment of his 2 years wearing through the present layer like ink through wet paper. He didn't stop. He pushed. Second threshold and the present fell away entirely. He was in time's fabric, woven through it rather than living on its surface. The Hogwarts he knew was a thin layer over the Hogwarts of 100 years ago over the Hogwarts of 400 years ago, and all of them were present simultaneously, layered like geological strata, and Harry moved through them without being caught by any of them, through the second threshold and pushing for the third. He heard his mother laugh. Not just the echo of it this time, fully, completely, with presence and warmth and the specific quality of a laugh that happens because something has genuinely surprised you. He felt her the way you feel sunlight when you've come inside from cold, total, immediate, undeniable. He pushed forward rather than stopping. Not yet, he thought, not yet. Third threshold. This was where he'd been before, the deepest he'd gone, and stepping through it was like stepping through the surface of a lake. The pressure changed on every side, the cold became structural rather than ambient, and time wasn't layers anymore. It was a medium he was moving through, the way water is a medium and you can move in all directions through it. He kept going. There was a fourth threshold. He'd known there was one, the Force had always suggested depth beyond what he'd reached, and hitting it was nothing like the first three. The first three were transitions, adjustments, the mind and body recalibrating. The fourth threshold was a wall of white light that arrived with no warning and no gradation, and moving through it took everything he had, every frequency he'd ever tuned himself to, every ounce of speed and intention and the specific stubbornness that had kept him out of the killing curse's path once already, and he went through it the way you go through something that is trying to stop you. And arrived, the Speed Force. It was not a place. It had no geography he could name and no edges he could find. It went in every direction without limit, and every direction was the same direction, which was motion. Pure motion. The universe moving through every moment it had ever moved through simultaneously, and in that simultaneity there was something that was not sound and not light but had the qualities of both, vast and warm and ancient and utterly completely alive. Harry stood in it and it moved through him and he moved through it, and for a moment the distinction between the two stopped being meaningful. Hello, he thought. The force responded not in language but in recognition, a pulse, enormous and intimate at once, the recognition of something greeting a part of itself. He was in it and of it, and it welcomed him with the warmth of something that has been waiting without urgency because it exists outside time and therefore waiting cost it nothing. He was also aware of two other things in the force. The first was the crack. He felt it before he saw it, a wrongness in the fabric, a seam that didn't belong, a place where the force's living warmth had an edge, a boundary between itself and something that wasn't itself. The crack ran through the force the way a crack runs through a ceiling, not dramatic, not immediately catastrophic, but structural. Compromised. Things were getting through it from the other side that had no business being in here. The second was Voldemort. He was here. Scattered the way Harry had felt him after Quirrell, but this was closer, more concentrated. What had dispersed through the thin places over 11 months had found an attractor, a place to cluster, and that place was the crack. He was pressed against it from the inside, the cold and red-eyed consciousness pressed against the membrane between the speed force and whatever lay on the other side, pushing against it slowly with the patience of something that has decided it will get through eventually. He was using the crack that had made Harry, using it as an exit. Harry crossed to the crack. No distance in the force had conventional meaning, but intention served the same purpose as locomotion, and looked through it. On the other side was the shade and something else. Something that the shade existed in front of, that the shade was a manifestation of, the way a wave is a manifestation of the ocean behind it. Harry looked at it and felt the hum go to the absolute silence it reserved for things that were genuinely, fundamentally significant. Death, not a figure in a robe. Not a metaphor. A presence, enormous and patient, and without malice, without appetite, simply present the way gravity is present, the way time is present, fundamental and impersonal, and so much older than anything that had ever lived that the concept of age stopped applying to it. The shade turned. In its own medium, on its own side of the crack, it had a form Harry hadn't seen in the physical world, not the drifting darkness between trees, but something more defined. Not a person, not exactly, but the architecture of one, height, orientation, the suggestion of a face that was reading him with the same careful, interested attention it had shown in every encounter since December of his first year. You came, it said in the language of cold pressure against the hum, but clearer here, more precise, like the same signal with less interference. I came, Harry said. You feel different, more present. I'm all the way in, Harry said. I'm not filtering anything. The shade looked at the crack between them, at Voldemort, visible now as a pulsing dark knot of cold consciousness pressing against the membrane. He found the crack on his own, the shade said. I did not lead him here. I know, Harry said. You told me about the Horcruxes. You didn't help him find his way. I have been deciding, the shade said, since last year in the dungeons, calculating. You said war would make me something different. It would. You were correct. A pause that had wait. I do not want to be a weapon. Then help me seal it, Harry said. The crack, we close it together, your side and mine simultaneously. Voldemort gets pushed back into dispersion. The shade, he looked at the enormous presence behind the shade, at death itself. The shade goes back to where it came from, where it actually belongs, not in the living world, not feeding on students in a school. Where it belongs. If I return, the shade said, I cease to exist as I am. Yes, Harry said. He said it directly without softening it, because the shade had always communicated with him in complete honesty, and it deserved the same. You're a fragment, an echo, made from a tear in something that wasn't meant to be torn. Going back means reintegration. Death, the shade said, and there was something in the word that might have been recognition rather than fear. Yes, Harry said. The shade was still for a long moment. In the force, time passed differently than in the physical world. He'd been here seconds or hours and couldn't tell, and it didn't matter. The force was patient. You are not afraid of me, the shade said. No, Harry said, you were never afraid of me. I was cautious, Harry said. That's different. Why not afraid? Harry thought about this properly. Not just a quick answer, actually thought about it, there in the white warmth of the speed force, with the crack between them and Voldemort pressing against the membrane, and death itself somewhere vast behind the shade's form. Because you came from the same place I did, he said. The same night, the same event. I've been running my whole life with something in my chest that belongs to you too, in a different way. You're not my enemy, you're the other half of what happened that night in Godric's Hollow. He paused. I'm not afraid of the other half of myself. The shade was still for another long moment. Then it moved. not toward the crack, backward into the medium behind it, into the presence of death that occupied the far side like an ocean. And it said into the cold and ancient vastness, I am ready. And Harry, on his side of the crack, put both hands against the membrane. He vibrated, not his hands himself. All of himself, every frequency he'd ever found, and every frequency the force itself was, the full range from structural stone deep to the finest glass surface, all of it simultaneously, the force harmonizing with him the way it had harmonized through his wand in Ollivander's shop, but entirely, completely, the song and the singer becoming the same thing, and he pushed. The crack began to close. Voldemort felt it immediately. The dispersed consciousness that had been pressing patiently against the membrane from the inside turned and pushed back. Not with a body, not with a wand, with pure will, the will of something that has survived by refusal for 60 years and does not know how to stop refusing, and Harry felt it against his hands, cold and desperate and hateful. No, Harry said. He ran. In the speed force, running was not locomotion, it was intention made total, the complete commitment of self to direction. Harry ran toward the crack with everything he was, every frequency and every threshold and every moment of the 2 years he'd spent learning what lived in his chest, and hit Voldemort's consciousness like a tide hitting a wall. Except the tide was warm and moving and the wall was cold and static, and cold, static things lose to warm, moving ones. Voldemort scattered. Not the way he'd scattered from Quirrell, that had been forceful, directional, a dispersal into the thin places where he'd spent months reconsolidating. This time the scattering was total. Harry's speed moved through the cold consciousness the way it had moved through the diary, at the exact frequency of its construction, resonating with every piece of it simultaneously, and what disperses at its own resonant frequency doesn't reconsolidate. The pieces didn't scatter into the thin places. They dispersed into the force itself, into the warm moving vastness, and the force received them the way a fire receives paper. The pushing from the other side of the crack stopped. Harry turned his attention to the closing. The shade was doing something on its side, not pushing but pulling, drawing the edges of the crack together from the other side, and Harry understood what was happening. The shade was using itself as the material to close the gap. It was weaving itself into the membrane, filling the crack with what it was made of, using its own substance to mend the thing its existence had depended on. It was not a small thing. Harry was watching a fragment of a fundamental force sacrifice its independent existence to repair the tear in another fundamental force, and doing it with the calm and deliberate intention of something that has made a real decision. He pushed from his side. The force moved with him, through him, his hands glowing white bright at the membrane, the crack narrowing, the shade's form on the other side becoming less defined as it gave more of itself to the mending weight, the shade said. Harry stopped. One thing. What? Harry said. The cold pressure arrived one final time, not threatening, not hungry, but deliberate. An image, a specific location in the physical world. A feeling of depth and cold, and something at the center that pulsed dark and slow. Not a Horcrux frequency he'd felt before. There are others you have not found, the shade said. I felt all of them. What I found I leave to you. And it gave him everything, every location, every frequency, every piece of dispersed soul scattered through the world in hidden objects. Not a full map, not coordinates. Better, the resonant frequency of each one, the specific signature of Voldemort's soul, distinct enough that Harry could find it the way the hum found anything, by listening in the right direction. Thank you, Harry said. Run well, the shade said, and closed the crack from the inside. Harry sealed it from his side at the same moment, pressing the force's warmth into the final gap, the membrane knitting together under his hands, and the last of the shade's independent form dissolved into the mending, became part of the fabric, a patch in the right material because it was, finally, made of the right thing. The crack was gone. The force settled around the sealed place, warm and whole, moving through and around the repair the way a river moves around a healed bank, accommodating, continuous. Harry stood in the middle of it. He was aware distantly of his physical body in the room of requirement, aware of two hands holding his wrists, one familiar grip on his left, one different but equally certain on his right. He was aware that he had been in here for a duration that had no relationship to clock time. He was aware that the force was full and warm and absolutely willing to keep him. He thought about Hermione's hand on his wrist, the specific weight of it. He thought about Ron's grip on his forearm, slightly tighter than comfortable, the grip of someone who is holding on because holding on matters. He thought about the Great Hall in the morning, the smell of breakfast, the specific chaos of 400 students starting a day simultaneously, Hedwig arriving through the high windows with snow on her wings. He thought about the students in the hospital wing, their life forces still draining into cold stone foundations, and the crack was sealed now. The shade was gone, but they needed to come back, needed someone to run down from the castle and stand in the corridors and be present in the living world and begin the work of understanding what had been left behind. He thought, there are more Horcruxes, and I know where they are, and I am not done. The force pulsed once, enormous and warm, and Harry felt it in his chest the way he'd always felt it, the hum, the second heartbeat, the thing that had been there since Godric's Hollow. It was the same. It had always been the same. He said to the force without words, "I'll be back." The force said without words, "I know." He ran. The room of requirement snapped back. The sensation of return was total body, weight, temperature, the cold hard floor under him, the pressure of 2 pairs of hands, the smell of stone and candle wax, and the slightly different quality of castle air at whatever hour of the night this was. He opened his eyes. Ron was white as paper and Hermione had tears running down her face which she appeared to be unaware of. Both of them were exactly where he'd left them, hands in place, and the expressions on their faces were those of people who have been holding on for much longer than they expected to hold. "Hey," Harry said. Ron let out a breath that sounded like it had been held for a significant portion of the preceding duration. "Hey," he said in a voice that was carefully, deliberately normal. "Good run." "Productive," Harry said. Hermione made a sound that was not quite a word and tightened her grip on his wrist before releasing it, and Harry looked at her and she looked at him and he could see her conducting the rapid inventory she always conducted, eyes responsive, color returning, posture appropriate, speech coherent, and releasing each item as confirmed. "How long?" he said. 4 hours, she said, her voice slightly wrecked. She cleared it. 4 hours and 11 minutes. He thought it felt like 20 minutes, maybe 30. He said, "The shade is gone, the crack is sealed. Voldemort is dispersed, actually dispersed this time, not scattered. The force received him." He looked at his hands, which were warm. "Still warm. The students in the hospital wing should start recovering. The drain will stop now that the shade is." He stopped. "Gone," Ron said. "Reintegrated," Harry said. "It closed the crack from the inside, used itself." He was quiet for a moment. "It wasn't evil, you know, the shade. It was just what it was, hungry and lost and made from the same thing I am." Hermione was writing, he noticed, even now. Her notebook was open on her knee and the quill was moving, and he found this deeply, specifically comforting, the certainty of Hermione Granger documenting things that needed documenting. "There are Horcruxes," he said. "More of them. The shade gave me the locations, not exact locations, but the frequencies. I know what to look for." He looked at them both. "I know where they are." "How many?" Hermione said. 6, Harry said. "That I felt. 6 objects with the same soul fragment signature as the diary." Ron said nothing. He was doing the math the way he did chess, not panicked, not overwhelmed, simply assessing the board. Then, "Right," he said. "So we finish second year, we go home in the summer. And then we start from the top." "That's the plan," Harry said. "Good plan," Ron said, and stood up and offered Harry his hand. Harry took it and stood, and the 3 of them walked out of the room of requirement and into the castle corridor, which was dark and quiet with deep night. Somewhere above them, the hospital wing held its 11 students, and Harry could feel already, the hum running easy and clear, no interference, no predator silence, no cold pressure from anything on the other side of a crack that no longer existed. The drain was stopped. The shade's connection to the physical world was closed. The students would wake in the morning. He stopped in the middle of the corridor. "One more thing," he said. They stopped with him. He raised his right hand, not pointing it at anything, not aiming. Just raised it and let the force run through it the way it ran through all of him, and the lightning came. Clean and white and quiet, not dramatic, not explosive, just present, the way the hum was always present, running along his fingers and across his knuckles and arcing gently between his fingertips in small, steady loops. He looked at it. Then he looked at them. Ron was grinning. Hermione, notebook still in hand, had the expression of someone who has just witnessed a proof arrive at its logical conclusion and finds it completely satisfying. "The lightning's new," Ron said. "It was always there," Harry said. "I just stopped filtering it." He let it run for another moment, warm and real and his, completely and entirely his, and then brought it down, not suppressing it but returning it to its natural state, back to the hum in the chest, the second heartbeat, the thing that had chosen him and that he had chosen back. He walked. Dumbledore was in his office, of course he was. At 3 in the morning, the headmaster of Hogwarts was sitting behind his desk with a cup of tea and Fawkes asleep on his perch, and the particular quality of wakefulness that belongs to someone who knew the night was going to be significant and waited accordingly. He looked up when Harry came in. Harry had come alone. Not because he was excluding Ron and Hermione, they'd both understood without being told that this part was his, that the conversation with Dumbledore that had been promised and postponed and owed since June of last year needed to happen with Harry in the room and nobody else. He sat down in the chair across from Dumbledore's desk and looked at the old man and said, "The shade is gone, the crack is sealed. Voldemort is gone from the thin places." Dumbledore set down his teacup. He looked at Harry with the full attention of someone giving everything they have to a single point. "Gone," he said carefully. "Dissolved into the Force," Harry said, "not destroyed the way you destroy a body. Dissolved, he's not coming back from that." "You're certain?" Yes, Harry said with the flatness of certainty. A silence. Fawkes made a small sound in his sleep. The fire in the headmaster's grate crackled once. The Horcruxes, Dumbledore said. Harry looked at him sharply. You know about them. I have suspected, Dumbledore said carefully. For some time I have not been certain. I have not, he stopped. I have not moved as quickly as I should have on several fronts. He held Harry's gaze steadily. I owe you a conversation. I have delayed too long. Yes, Harry said. You do. Sybil Trelawney made a prophecy, Dumbledore began. I know about the prophecy, Harry said. Or most of it. Neither can live while the other survives. He watched Dumbledore's expression. Voldemort's dissolved now. That resolves it one way. He paused. What I want to know about isn't the prophecy. It's the woman in your tower office 30 years ago who told you about the Speed Force and that you should help me understand it and that you wouldn't. Dumbledore was very still. You've been having visions, he said. I've been going back through time, Harry said. I saw you with her. I need to know who she was and what she told you and what you've been keeping from me since September of last year. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Then he did something Harry had not expected. He smiled. Not the usual smile, the warm and slightly evasive headmaster smile. Something smaller and more genuine than that, the smile of a man who has been caught doing something he knew was wrong and is, despite himself, relieved. Her name was Miriam Vance, he said. She was the last person chosen by the Speed Force before you. She lived to 93. She spent her life studying the Force, its history, its chosen, its relationship with time and death and magic. He folded his hands on the desk. She told me 30 years ago that the Force would choose again. She told me the circumstances would involve a death mark and a failed curse and a crack in the membrane. He paused. She told me the boy who carried it would be extraordinary and would need guidance and that I must not try to manage him, that managing a chosen was the surest way to lose them. Another pause longer. I managed you anyway, I'm sorry for it. Harry looked at this apology, examined it, found it genuine. The 4 chosen, Harry said. She told you about them. 2 destroyed. 1 isolated, 1 who remade the world. Dumbledore looked at Fawkes. I have been afraid, he said quietly, of which you would be. I'm not afraid of it, Harry said. I know, Dumbledore said. That more than anything tells me which one you are. They sat in the office for another hour and the conversation was real, finally, not hints, not management, not the careful navigation of a man who thinks he knows best and is arranging things accordingly. Dumbledore told him what he knew. The prophecy in full, the Horcruxes and their suspected locations, the history of Voldemort's soul fracturing, the things Miriam Vance had documented about the Speed Force's mechanics that Hermione's 1/2 paragraph in a 19th century text was an echo of. Harry listened and asked questions and pushed back when something didn't match what he'd experienced directly, and Dumbledore answered and corrected himself when Harry was right, which was several times. Near the end of the hour, Dumbledore said, The Horcruxes, you intend to find them. Yes, Harry said, I have the frequencies, I know what to look for. It will take time. I know, but not as much time as you think. Harry stood. I'm faster than you think. Yes, Dumbledore said. And there was something in his voice that might have been the specific relief of a man who has been carrying a burden alone for a long time and can feel finally that someone else's hands are on it too. I am beginning to understand that. Harry walked to the office door. He stopped. Miriam Vance, he said, is she documented anywhere, any of her work? Her journals are in the library's restricted section, Dumbledore said. I placed them there myself 40 years ago when she gave them to me. A pause. I'll have Madame Pince make them available to you. Harry nodded. He opened the door. Harry, Dumbledore said. Harry looked back. She also told me, Dumbledore said carefully, that the one who remade the world did not do it alone. That the Force chose the runner, but the runner chose the people who ran beside them. He held Harry's gaze. She said to tell the next chosen that the connections matter as much as the speed. Harry thought about 2 pairs of hands on his wrists, holding on for 4 hours and 11 minutes. I know, he said. Tell her she was right. He walked out. The hospital wing in the morning was warm with returning life. Harry came in at 7:30 before breakfast, before the corridors filled. The 11 students were waking, not all at once, not dramatically, but in 2s and 3s, eyes clearing. Bodies sitting up slowly on white beds with the slightly dazed expression of people who have been somewhere they can't describe and are relieved to be back. Madame Pomfrey moved between beds with restorative potions and brisk professional warmth. Alara Bones was sitting up in the first bed. She was a 5th year he didn't know well, tall, dark-skinned, with her mother's eyes, Susan Bones' cousin. She looked at Harry when he came in the door and said in a slightly rough voice, You fixed it, didn't you? It wasn't quite a question. Yeah, Harry said. She nodded once slowly as though filing this in the correct mental folder. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me, Harry said. Get better. She smiled at this. A real smile, slightly crooked, and Harry went back into the corridor and walked down toward the great hall where breakfast was starting and the smell of toast and coffee was making its way up through the castle, and at the bottom of the stairs he found Ron and Hermione. Hermione had Miriam Vance's journals under her arm, 3 of them leather-bound and old. She must have gone to the library at opening time. "Madam Pince let you have them," Harry said. "Dumbledore sent a note before I arrived," Hermione said. "She was waiting for me." She looked at the journals with an expression of someone trying not to show how thrilled they are about a primary source document. She was not succeeding. Miriam Vance developed a complete theoretical framework for the Speed Force. She documented 4 chosen across 3 continents and 2 millennia. This is extraordinary. This is what we've been trying to work out for 2 years from first principles." "Read it," Harry said. "All of it. Tell me everything." "Obviously," she said, clutching the journals slightly tighter. Ron was holding 3 plates of toast from the Great Hall because breakfast was not going to wait for landmark theoretical discoveries. "Students are waking up," he said, handing Harry a plate. "I heard Madame Pomfrey telling McGonagall. All 11 of them starting about 40 minutes ago." "I know," Harry said. "How do you know?" "I felt it," Harry said. "The hum told me." He took a piece of toast. "The shade's gone, the crack is sealed. The only cold thing left in this castle is Snape's regular classroom temperature." Ron laughed. Hermione was already reading the first journal, walking toward the Great Hall with the focused inattention of someone who trusts the world to stay out of her way. Harry walked beside them, his 2 best people in the world, one reading and one eating, and both of them entirely themselves, in a castle that was warm and full of morning noise and completely, for the first time since October, free of the particular cold that comes from something feeding on what lives here. He felt the hum run through him, low and steady, the way it always did. The second heartbeat. The Speed Force warm in his chest, present and easy in his. He thought about the Horcruxes, 6 of them, their frequencies memorized, their locations approximate but findable. He thought about 3rd year and 4th and the work ahead and the world that was larger than Hogwarts and was going to need someone who could move through it faster than it expected. He thought about the woman in the journals under Hermione's arm, who had spent 93 years running through the world and left her notes behind for the next one. "Run well," the shade had said. Harry finished his toast. He pushed through the great hall doors into noise and warmth, and the ordinary, extraordinary morning of a school full of people who didn't know what had happened last night and were simply glad to be here, which was enough, which was plenty. He sat down. He poured himself tea. He looked across the hall and found Alara Bones at the Hufflepuff table, returned from the hospital wing, eating breakfast with the appetite of someone who has very recently been reminded that eating breakfast is a good thing to do. She looked up and caught his eye and nodded once. Harry nodded back. He picked up his tea and felt the lightning move quiet and warm through his hands and thought, 3rd year then, and whatever comes after, the Speed Force hummed. He smiled.